Ready to start? Start with stuff.
No, I decided to sit up here. There's more space.
Seems like a lot more space without the barriers anymore, so.
It's nothing against you guys personally.
Oh, that's. Yeah, I just keep seeing there's so many people.
Originally, Terry wanted you and I to sit at
That's
that little
awesome.
table together, and I'm like, why don't we just put everyone at one big table?
We'll call the meeting at 5:31. Those present, Mayor Morrow will be late if he shows. Gearbach, CO, Dillon, Delorco, Camaro Sulak, and Kraus. Staff present, City Manager O'Toole, Clerk Royal, Engineer Humphris, City Manager Greshman, yes. Treasurer Bennett, Deputy Treasurer McDonough, yep. Assistant Treasurer Weberline, Director Searles, I believe he's coming, we'll get him in a minute. Superintendent Briggs, Park and Rec Director Scruggs, and the Police Chief may be coming in a little while. With that, do I have an approval of the agenda as submitted or amended?
It's submitted.
Move CO, do I have a second?
Second?
Second Dillon to approve the agenda as submitted. We'll hold off on the absences until the end of the meeting.
All in favor?
All in favor? Thank you. Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to public comment. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time and make comment or question on items that appear on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested, but not required, to state their name and address for the record. Do we have any statements? Terry, anything online? Moving forward, capital improvement plan. I'll turn this now over to our city manager, Ms. O'Toole.
Thank you, everyone. So you should have previously received the FY 23 through 28 capital improvement plan. In addition, at the dais tonight is a copy of just the FY 23 capital projects plan. And that is to give you an example of how we are planning to present this information as part of our regular budgeting process in the future. It gives a little bit more detail on each of the specific projects for FY 23 in particular. But our hope is that in the future, we can start putting it in our multi-year capital improvement plans into this system, the new software we're using. Very quickly for the capital improvement plan in general, the document that you received initially, first page just simply outlines the sources and uses of funds and aggregates those project totals across all years based on the different departments or funds that the projects will be occurring within. Obviously, there's a considerable investment within wastewater, and that does show the spread for our anticipated expansion and investment project starting in FY 24. Beyond that, still considerable investments for water, streets, and sewer infrastructure. The goal of this meeting tonight is to give you an opportunity to provide your comments and hear from our staff members regarding the priorities that we've identified for the coming 6 years. And certainly if there are projects that council no longer feels are a priority or projects missing, which you do feel are a priority, now is the time to have that conversation. But unless there's any specific comments from staff members, anything else you want to add before we launch into council questions? No, I didn't think anyone wanted to jump into the hot seat there.
Okay. I think what we'll do is, like we've done in the past, if there's questions from members of council, we'll give 5 minutes to each one, and we can go that way. We'll start with Council Member Kraus.
Not at this time.
Not at this time.
None here.
My only question is, and it would be to the entire group, is there anything from fiscal year 22 or even something from 21 that has fallen off? Are any of these projects carryovers is sort of my question. And we can do that.
No,
Are
I
we
think-
going to go through like section by departments?
No, actually, I think Ms. O'Toole mentioned that we would basically do it based on our individual questions, if we had questions after having reviewed this capital improvement plan.
Okay.
So I was giving a first quick announcement if you wanted to have any questions immediately, just overall. And from that perspective, that question could be answered right now if you'd like. Ms. Zilli.
Okay, that's fine.
And I'm not sure what,
Well, I think specifically
Joe?
throughout a lot of the departments, there's a lot of projects that are, that we've been working on that are coming over. We have had, everybody to my left of me this is their first look at the CIP for this fiscal year. So there's a lot of things that did come off. That's why the document from ClearGov is basically just a one-year program. Tesha inherited a large bond proceed that had a lot of things in the wish list and, a lot of that. But the documents that you have here are the FY23 that we're going to plan on starting after July 1st. We do have the water lining project that's going on Michigan Ave that is an FY21 project that's coming over. And then we have continual projects with the identifying at the wastewater treatment plant. And I think that's the big ones that we've carried over.
There are a handful of parks projects that I believe were carried forward to future years as well, like the pickleball court and the soccer field irrigation system. Really just projects that we haven't yet had staff capacity to focus on.
any other questions? Ms. Dillon, at this time?
I would just want to embellish on that then, if I could.
Sure.
Or,
Yep.
I'm not sure
That's
what
fine.
this process is, if we're just
No,
sort
it's a
of
little
getting one.
different than we've done in the past. so
Okay.
Basically, it's going to be from you all asking questions of our staff, if you have questions regarding.
Yeah, we're looking for this to be a dialogue, so if you have concerns or questions, please feel free to provide those now.
Okay. So then those projects that have sort of gotten pushed forward, that we didn't in the past have time, resources for, are we now looking at delegating those out? Because what I want to make sure is that's not just a ball that's going
Sure.
to keep rolling down the road.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, and I'm sure Engineer Humphreys would agree with me on this, that we would like to start seeing more involvement from outside consultants, specifically in relation to things that are perhaps not in her wheelhouse, like parks and street improvements that aren't directly tied to other utility infrastructure. So yes, the intention would be that we engage the services of other engineering consultants for those projects to take a hold of them. Or for some of the smaller projects, I think with the changes that we've made to the hierarchy within the Parks Department, there's some opportunity for possibly deputy director, the deputy director to step up into taking on a project management role. And I think that's something that we as a staff have expressed interest in helping her do.
Okay. And then the other piece is, where can we find additional information for this? And I'll just start with a basic thing where there's, on the first page, municipal building maintenance and repair, there's $100,000 in '24. What exactly does that, where do we find what that entails?
So that is the purpose of moving to this software, ClearGov. As you can see, for fiscal year '23, there starts to be more of a description. We'll be adding more information as we move forward, but part of this capital planning through the ClearGov software allows us to create project pages, basically. And the project pages that we select will probably be geared more towards larger projects, to be honest. Not every project will have a page if it's just a small project. But that will give us appropriate tracking, location information. We can upload pictures, we can upload updates. It's a public-facing portal and an individual website for each of those projects.
Okay.
Could you give a little background on ClearGov? I know you just did kind of, but
You want to
if
jump
we
in
could have a
there?
little more information, I think this is such a new item for us to understand, it'd be helpful.
Sure. So we have subscribed to ClearGov, which is an online digital budget book, and then it also will provide limited capital improvements. I was going to try to share my screen, but I guess that's not something that we can happen. But what this will do, what ClearGov is it's a subscription software that each contributor, which would be every department head within the city of Saline, would be able to go in there and keep track of their projects, be able to add in their, the information as to who their contractors are and stuff like that. On the larger projects that we need We want to have our, like, let's take the water lining project for instance. We're going to have updates on that as far as when the construction's going to change and different things like that. So with this ClearGov, once we launch that project out there, it would have a website. On our website, there would be a link that would say, this is the project, the water and sewer lining on Michigan Ave. They would be able to click that, see any updates that's put out there. They would be able to see who the contact person is, to send emails directly to that person and ask them things. They'll be able to see anything that staff uploads out there, including the notices. You know, the Department of Public Works just sent out a notice saying that, you know, this is happening to all the businesses. Every business notice that we put out there would be published and stuff like that. This is the first year we've tackled it for capital improvements, and that's, so far, we focused on FY23. And I'm saying we kind of, in general, staff has been very, very busy working, trying to, you know, understand the projects that we've had on this document before. So I entered all the data, and I'm working with staff one-on-one to get them to have that, and then we'll publish that out on our website.
And that launch will be in July, or are we doing some projects now with this?
I'm hoping that I can have some time and work and try to get the big water line and use that as our test.
Testing?
Yeah. This will also include our digital budget book. So you'll have the capital improvement book, but then you'll also have a digital budget book, which will put all your budget information, your transmittal letter, and everything about our budget available online as well.
Excellent, thank you. Ms. Dillon, sorry, I wanted to make that clarified.
No, thank you very much. So the one thing that I'm trying to figure out is things that are in like 24, 25, 26, everything here, what has changed from last year? And I'm not looking for items, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, have you added things? Are these just all carryovers from previous years? I guess.
For the most part, what this number is, what we have focused on is to get a good grip on FY23 in projects that we need to have, that we can get an engineering cost and an accurate budget cost for. We're living in times like we've never seen before with costs changing from the drop of a hat. So Tasha has been chasing numbers, trying to, you know, get updated project numbers on all the projects that we had. So what we tried to focus on and what FY23 strongly represents are those projects that we're going to be able to get to this fiscal year. So some things moved out because we're not going to be able to get to, or we didn't have engineering and design costs on it. So what the nuts and bolts of the strongest part of this document that you can look at is FY23, because those are the things that between Tasha, Bill, and Larry, they've identified that yes, we're going to be able to tackle those this year. Has anything dropped out? There are some things that we had to reevaluate because based on their expertise has become a priority, and so we've moved them up on the priority. Basically, focusing on that bond issue that we received the funds for so that we make sure that those projects are identified. And then our street projects, because we have the two resources of both city and county millages coming in for that, to make sure that our street projects, we can get them engineered and designed and then the construction materials for the next year. And to have enough time to get those bids processed without hurrying and rushing, and because the more timely matter we do that, and the better, hopefully, the better bid pricing we'll get.
And one thing I'll add to that too is some of these things may have been explained in broader terms in previous capital plans, but for example, like the SCADA upgrades, we really broke those out by individual locations and project types so that you had a clear understanding of the cost associated with each component. But as far as totally new projects, no, really there's not. It's more been moving things around based on what we believe are reasonable capital expenditures. The only exception to that being is now we are definitively including that wastewater treatment plant expansion project.
Okay. At some point, is there a way to sort of do a document compare to sort of see what was here, what we've reprioritized, I guess would be I don't know if there's a way to see that.
Well, the capital improvement plan as adopted by city council is out on that share drive, that, the financial share drive, the one that we had last year that you approved. You could look at that FY '23 and compare it to this FY '23. That information is out there.
Right,
You could look at that.
right, but I mean, that's, you're looking at, 10 pages of line by line.
The
I
first
guess I'm
page
just
is a
looking.
recap like this. I mean, you could
Mm-hmm,
look at the sources by fund.
okay, that would be great. I'll yield the floor at this point.
Mr. Delaco?
The real lingering question I have is, where are we accounting for the debt service that we're going to accrue via the state revolving fund for the wastewater treatment plant projects?
So that is all back on the sanitary sewer, which should be towards the back, and you'll see the project. And the way the document, the orange one that you've received, I don't know, orange, yellow, white, whatever color you want to call it. The projects are listed at the top, and the wastewater treatment plant is there. And then if you look down at the bottom, you'll see that, actually, it's on the second page of that one, the state revolving fund. We have proceeds coming in on that, and then it goes out through over the years for the,
Yes, so the reason I had the question is because I only see bond financing accounted for in FY '23 in all categories, not just sanitary sewer, for nothing for '24, '25, et cetera.
so the bond financing is that large bond that we took out this past year, that we have all the projects that we'll be expending in this year. The SRF is located above that.
Okay.
It's a separate bond issuance.
Okay, so, all right. Yeah, because I wanted to try to get a sense of how much per year we were going to be spending on debt service. So the sewer source of funds, the top SFR, so the 700,000 figure would be what we're looking at for FY '23. Okay, all right, thank you. I'm just trying to get oriented to that. Everything else is still digesting, but that's going to be one thing that definitely changes the landscape of how we have to budget once we take out those bonds.
So when, in part of our budget book, not only the digital budget, but when we do the budget process, we'll have a debt schedule that'll show you the debt schedule and our allocations and amortization schedule in there as well.
Okay, great, thank you.
And primarily, most of that debt will be absorbed by the water and sewer funds, correct? For those
There is a portion of it that is the general fund because of the storm sewers, and we are doing, as you can look on the general fund, there is a significant contribution of funds that are gonna go $1.4 million towards storm sewer 4 and 5. I think last council meeting you approved some funding on that, and then that's just a percentage of bigger ticket items.
My questions, I like this format. I think this is one of the best ones we've seen so far in terms of being able to understand exactly where the funding and everything is coming from. So kudos to you for advancing us into another format and getting this stuff online. We're looking at almost $13 million in one fiscal year before we even start talking about the wastewater treatment plant. These projects, do we anticipate any concerns with, I'm looking at the one section where grants and donations are around $600,000. Are those speculative grants or ones that we suspect we should be able to easily acquire?
I believe that dollar amount are ones that we are the 600,000
Yeah.
are ones that we have got some sort of commitment that we will be receiving them.
Yeah, that's the federal allocation that we were notified we would receive for the pump station modernization
I thought that
project.
number looked familiar. Okay, thanks. But we haven't anticipated any other potential infrastructure money or funding coming in that may potentially?
No, not at this time, though it's certainly something we are aggressively pursuing.
So right now, we feel comfortable that we have the resources to achieve this $13 million budget.
Yes, unfortunately, at this point, we're starting down the path of having to talk about significant water and sewer rate increases to start getting us there, which is why we will absolutely be pursuing federal funding.
So that will be the one discussion, is understanding how this money comes about, and really it is dependent on those.
Correct.
Those
At this
fees.
point, we have a plan in place for financing these capital projects as presented, but certainly if there's anything we can do to reduce that impact on ratepayers, we will be pursuing it.
Getting into a little of the other issues, I know one of the questions I had for the city manager was understanding how the roads are being determined and the Paisley rating that we used to use in the past. And I believe, I went back to 2017 and found what we use in terms of the millage. I think when we proposed that in terms of trying to determine what the status of our roads are and prioritizing that. I think that's one of the things I'm hoping we're going to go back to, although I think we currently use it, but at a much higher level, not individual streets. And anyone want to touch that one?
I'm going to defer that to somebody with a.
And I may be asking a question that defers back to previous staff, so if it isn't an answer, I just want to see that we may move forward on determining how we, determine which streets we're going to work on.
Right now, I can tell you that the last Pacer data that I can find for the whole city is a few years old, should be captured every other year. I think that moving forward, I would recommend that we use multiple metrics to go on the road replacement schedule. That would be taking into consideration the rating of the water, sewer, and storm pipes underneath the road. Marry those together and get your maximum bang for your dollar on your projects. I don't think that worst first will be our best strategy, and I've not been here long enough, and I apologize, to give you a quality breakdown of the data that I would suggest we use as our roadmap for water, road, and sewer replacement and rehabilitation.
The reason why I'm asking, because when I look at some of the streets that are now on here, I think some have changed. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I know other streets that are complete failures. and trying to understand that and trying to determine where that's happening. So I'm hoping that you do develop something in the next year that helps us reprioritize. And knowing what's going on in 2023 to make sure that there isn't something on there that could be deferred in favor of somewhere else that's more of an issue.
Right, and I definitely want to make sure we're bringing projects that we don't do the road, leave the water and sewer underneath in poor condition, or vice versa.
So if I may too, you will see as part of your FY23 budget a significant request for investment in GIS technology. And part of that is simply because we need to start mapping this information so that we can make those decisions holistically rather in response to one specific issue about a facility. I think myself, Larry, and Tesha are of the same philosophical opinion when it comes to infrastructure. We view it as one unit, not individual isolated problems. So when we're talking about streets, we need to be talking about underground infrastructure as well. And unfortunately, right now, we just don't have that comprehensive data set to give us the full picture.
And I believe you wanted it. One time you mentioned coordinating that with our utilities too, so that not only do we talk about our water and sewer, but we also talk about gas mains.
Yes, exactly.
other
We've
things.
already started to work a little bit more closely with DTE about our projects over the next 4 years, and absolutely, that is going to come into play when we're talking about how we're making decisions, because we don't want them coming through either and tearing up roads right after they're just installed.
And DTE is well known for doing that. The other question, we look at a lot of these projects, and it looks like this is going to take a lot of staff time. And so the considerations of how will we prioritize the necessities versus the wants? And I don't know if that's something that we want to talk a little bit more about in terms of, we'd all love to have things like, I'm going to get called on this one, but a swimming pool or something like that. It's more the issue of, we know wastewater and everything is going to be a priority. How do we take some of these items off? And maybe council needs to discuss about that as a point of contention. What items on here do we feel need to be postponed? They look nice, but I think we know in the next 3 years it's infrastructure. And we all need to agree on that and direct it that way. So if there's any comments, anyone wants to join? Ms.
I think that's a
Krause?
great point, actually, because I actually, to Janet's point, I did pull out that old one because I'm still feeling new-ish. So I did pull out the old one, and it wasn't too bad, that front sheet. You can kind of see what, so I actually had done that. But to Dean's point, I look at this too, and when I think of getting back to basics, and again, I'll go with you, I don't want to call out the rec center or anything like that, but if we don't have enough, if we don't have clean water, no one's going to care about the pool. And I'll put myself on the hot seat to say that, but that's how it goes. If we're talking about returning to basics, what on here are, so I don't really have any problems with this in general. I think it's very well thought out. I trust all of you. I'm not an engineer. I think we have really good staff and department heads now, but where council could have input is to figure out what could go on the chopping block should we need to. Budgets we've been voting on additional increases from prior things that come up because the estimates were old or who knows what. So looking towards the future, I don't want something major or basic to get pushed because of that. So we might want to talk about, if it gets really bad, what are we cutting?
And I think that's going to be one of the things that's coming forward from the rec center task force, and to bring that information. But there are a lot of things, even when you look at the capital improvements plan, from my own perspective, most of the stuff we're doing for the rec center are repairs and maintenance. It's not new stuff and everything. But there's other things in here that could be attributes that I think we do to the parks and things that may, because we don't have staff to do those, I think we'll have to look in terms of prioritizing their work schedule too. Kevin?
Yes, I was going to talk about prioritizing, and a little bit to Dawn's point about if we had to, what could be cut. And as far as staff time, we've been subcontracting more and more engineering services and other needs out. What is the opportunity if we needed to do that for certain projects that we don't have enough staff for? And what does that look like?
Do you want to answer?
To expand if we needed more actual staff or personnel doing some of these capital improvements or administrative work.
I will say, as far as the capital improvements that were handing as far as existing projects, we have four different consulting engineers currently working on what I would consider capital projects. We also have two separate consulting engineers, one for our dam and one for our bridges. So a handful, we have 6 high-quality consulting engineers that are working for us right now that came out of the engineering pre-qualification that was done, I want to say, about a year and a half ago. So we do have a list of pre-qualified consultants that we're pulling from.
Tasha, can you lean forward a little bit more or pull your microphone towards you?
That means you've used up all your time.
You'll have to finish up then.
The stars.
I think while they're fixing that microphone, to get to one of the end points of what I think you're asking, ultimately, at the end of each project, if we own the utilities, we're going to want a staff representative over that project. So we're gonna get spread a little bit.
For sure.
As we're doing these larger,
Mhm.
volume projects up front. That's why the prioritization going forward could be adjusted to meet what we have. We don't want to leave ultimately our projects at the consultant or the contractor, final oversight.
Right. So are we confident that we have enough current staff members to be there and to be overseeing, or
No,
in
we-
the timeline of that?
Yeah,
And-
FY '23 budget does include some small supplemental support for the engineering side of things. What we felt that we could monetarily handle for that year, but absolutely, moving forward with the growth of our community, with the capital needs that we have on the docket, additional in-house, higher-level project management and engineering support will be essential.
Okay.
So we will have an additional request this year, but I would not be surprised if we have additional needs in FY '24.
Okay. I want to make sure that's accounted for because we really put a lot on Tesha's plate, especially. And it's all critical needs for our infrastructure. And same with Director Searles as well. Next question that I have is regarding the sanitary sewer use of funds. Obviously, it jumps up in '24 and '25. Is there a breakout on what the normal costs would be that are separate, or is it too intertwined?
So part of the presentation that Tetra Tech will be giving at our regular meeting today will outline some of those individual component costs. Fair warning, there is a little bit of a difference between our current capital improvement plan and what they're presenting that may require us to make some difficult choices, or kind of play the game with state revolving funds, so to speak, to see what sort of support the federal government's going to be willing to give us on that project.
Okay, because looking at the numbers, both the source of funds and use of funds, obviously we go up and then we go down. There's obviously a trend with our need for capital improvements, but it's hard to identify like a baseline of what certain required repairs and maintenance is from one year to the next. And when the next time we're going to need significant funds for other improvements that are coming down the line. And I know we have, looking out more than 5 years to 10 years and further, but.
Yeah, and part of what we're doing with the creation of the operations and maintenance manual as well, which we should be nearing conclusion of that project soon here, is establishing those type of protocols for maintenance standards. And obviously, as we upgrade the plant, we're going to be talking about the useful life of individual equipment, so we don't put ourselves in this position in the future.
If you look at page 10, I think that could actually answer some of the questions. Page 10 of the orange document, I can use any better one. In there identifies the actual waste treatment plant expansion cost of, approximately $20 million for 24, 25, and then $4 million in 26. And if you look at the bottom, we're averaging around $6 million, a couple $1 million every year, looking at just sanitary projects, where we will likely not incur a lot of expenses until FY28. So we're going to be spending a lot of funds until FY28.
And that's inclusive of the plant and the infrastructure. We have plans this year to do the East Belt, and staff is recommending that pretty much immediately following completion of the East Belt project, we start to prepare for the West Belt project. I will say, I think, Tasha, feel free to jump in. We did talk about it's possible that we may be able to get away with just a rehabilitation of the Central Belt, depending on what growth is looking like in that area.
I will agree with Manager O'Toole that there were substantial collection system improvements identified in the 2019 SAW application. And when you included the West and Central Belt, I think it was over $20 million, and those were probably low numbers now, just like we've seen with everything. So, but really looking at Central Belt, I think there's a lot less growth potential in that. So maybe we can just rehabilitate some of the sewers instead of actually spending the money on capital, digging them out, or upsizing them. But the West Belt, which is what runs through Mill Pond and down the west side across the river, there's no doubt we'll have to be putting some money in that part of the system.
How are we accounting for cost overruns and at the rate of equipment, materials, and labor is increasing, or projected increases, so that we have a contingency or change the scope of a project if we can?
So right now, major projects, well, thankfully, some of our larger projects, we've already kind of are starting to build it into, like East Belt, we've already kind of upped the estimates that we were expecting for that. We increased the estimates that we thought of for the West Belt project because of what we're seeing now. What I can say is we're probably anticipating in most of these cases, if it's within the next 3 years, probably a 15 to 30% contingency. For example, the wastewater treatment plant expansion project, I believe that has about a 30% contingency built in at this point because we just do not know what material costs are going to look like. And to the points made here previously, it can change from day to day to month, depending on when you're placing those bids.
Are we going to make sure that we make the public aware of that potential, or is that causing alarm when we don't quite know?
For some of our larger projects, I think we do have opportunities to scale them back. For example, the East Belt project, we've already discussed scaling back the walkway because the material costs are just so high, and obviously the priority is the infrastructure. On the wastewater treatment plant, we have talked about what it would look like to move out one of those processes to a future year instead. So the staff has been having conversations about what those contingencies might look like. Certainly, we'd like to deliver the projects that we have planned, but I think we're all realists and prepared for the adaptability that comes into play anytime you do a capital project.
Okay, thank you for that. I yield the floor.
Jack?
I just wanted to make the point that, in my experience, the capital improvement project plan itself is a living document, subject to change year after year, actually sometimes month after month, depending on what crops up and what breaks and what need suddenly arises. I mean, I see where it looks like annually, I think we'd replace one police vehicle, but it looks like for FY '23, we're going all in for body cams and deferring a police vehicle for that year. So I think a lot of these things are done already by staff as part of this. And to your point, Janet, I think going back and looking at some of the old plans, you can see where some of these shifts have been made. It's just a realistic shift, I think, among the people that we've hired to do the job for us within the budgets that we've got. So thank you all for your hard work.
I'd like to make note, too, that thankfully we're fully staffed as we go into this capital improvement year. I think that makes a big difference. So,
Well,
thank you for working so well together.
my treasurer's retiring.
He's got good backup, though. I do want to, Janet had mentioned, Colleen, in the general fund, under that 150,000 that we've got in '24 and '25, those numbers are based, I think, estimated off of
The facility study, correct.
And we didn't have anything in FY '23 to that because we are missing a staff person, so.
Yes. Ideally, once we have the community development director position filled, the hope would be that they could take ownership of that again.
And that's just a reminder to council, we paid to have a study done on all of our municipal buildings so that we're not, we can plan for this better looking out in the future. And we're not behind the 8 ball saying, oh, the sky is falling, you know, we're preparing. So that will help kind of stabilize this going forward, I think, as well.
Is it possible to identify any, well, I'm going to call them enhancements that are significant or an issue that are not necessarily either a repair or a maintenance type thing? Like, I think we'd mentioned one of the issues is irrigation for the soccer fields. Are there other items like that that we would identify that would necessarily not needed this year or could be postponed? That, just a recommendation, not that you have to identify them right now, but if there's similar things like that, I think it would be helpful for us to understand where that would occur.
Yeah, I think we as a staff could certainly take a look again at the capital improvement plan, and I don't know how we would want to necessarily distinguish it, but maybe make some sort of indication of, you know, these are the projects that will have to be a priority, and really need to be bid in this year, and these are the others that maybe there's more flexibility.
Because I do know, I mean, there's some things, even like with historic properties, there's one replacing a furnace, but when you're in a building that's got a 70-year-old furnace, you're really borrowing time on that. So there's things that we have pushed off for many, many years that I think that we have to repair if we're going to continue to own those properties and maintain them in a reasonable condition.
And do we have the large projects tied to press releases, or at least making the city aware of what project is being done and for how long? You know, like after we finish the Michigan Avenue water lining, I think that's about two weeks.
Actually, I'm pleased to say that our first 2 projects are on the DPW construction update page. So we have 2 project summary pages up now, one on the pump station modernization project that was, I think the contract was awarded about a month ago, February 14th here. And then the other project is the East Michigan lining project that's up there. And that one is, as you said, it's starting soon. It's starting this week. And we expect it to be out there till about June for that project. And then MDOT's coming in right after, and we'll also be doing work on that area through the end of the summer. So we have 2 project websites up now, and more to come. Our next one will probably be maybe East Belt.
Yeah, you can expect to start seeing much more frequent town halls on individual projects, dedicated websites, dedicated project pages, dedicated press releases. There's a much more concerted effort, and I think it's a sentiment that's shared by numerous members of staff that public education on these projects is essential. Because if we can head off a few questions, frankly, it frees up staff time to continue focusing on execution of the project.
Right. I know many people are concerned about the barrels on Michigan Avenue and thinking that it's being torn up again or what's going on.
We did, live stream, like a, virtual type town hall. We passed out physical notices. It has a, it has a QR code on it. So we're gonna be able to update all the residents as we have them. They can just scan the QR code and it'll take us right to the city's website with the project information on it. It's gonna, we're trying our best to get in front of it because
Right.
it does stall you out when you have questions that could have been had it all.
Okay, and traditional social media posts as well. Because I can see the difficulty of people and with our new website and trying to figure it out and learn it. I haven't yet either, you know. But, so, yeah, that's a good idea.
And with Michigan Avenue, scheduled to be torn up, we want the residents to know what's our project and what's MDOT's project.
Yes. Let's blame it on MDOT. I mean, let's make sure it's clear.
That's actually a good point, because I've been sharing a lot of this in the Saline Post. I've been very brave, taking one for the whole team. And I've been getting great feedback already on that page with the projects. There's 2 on there right now, like you said, and then you said East Belt will be next. And so it will take a while to turn that around, but I don't think that, you know, social media and using these different technological things that you are all using, like QR codes, it's going to take a while for that to disseminate out. But I've received really good feedback on a lot of that. It would be good to, once we figure out the improvement plan and the budget, you could maybe have another page for upcoming, you know. I mean, maybe you already had that planned, I don't know, but it seems like they're really interacting, so great, that's a great job.
One question I have, and I'm looking at some of the items of computer equipment upgrade and so forth. What do we consider as a dollar value in terms of capital improvement? Are we using a federal standard or something, or?
$5,000, if we have to capitalize it and, you know, put it out with depreciation, then it usually makes this document. There are some ongoing costs that we include in here just because it's, you know, computers.
Right.
That kind of stuff, so you'll see some dollar amounts that might be a little below that. But usually what goes on here is the amount that we're gonna capitalize, which is a $5,000 threshold.
The only reason I'm asking, because I see one where it's a computer equipment upgrade in 2023 being just $2,500. I'm like,
Yeah.
is there enough, and that's one question leading into the other, is there enough funds identified for our capital improvements related to equipment and cybersecurity and all of that we feel confident?
We'll look at that when we get all into the budget process.
Well, and I would say there's fewer capital-related expenses, that's more software-related, which you would see as part of our regular budgeting process. Though we did have a considerable investment going on right now in terms of physical security for our key card entry system.
And that was another question I was going to ask related to that, so, okay. No, it's just that I didn't know if we needed a new servers or that type of thing that becomes more and more complicated, because I think some security is going to be more hardware versus software, especially as you see things occurring with overseas and such. Any other questions? Janet?
Thank you. I do have a couple more. So obviously, you know, the road millage is going to expire, and that's $500,000 a year. I assume that we will try to take that back to the voters again for a renewal. But if at some point we have millage fatigue, are we making plans for where we're going to find that extra $500,000? Are we looking to increase our millage to cover more and take some of the costs out of, you know, general fund dollars or our street, you know, roads and streets? I'm just trying to gauge, you know, I don't want to make that assumption. You know, our list of road repairs just keeps growing. And so I just want to make sure that we kind of keep that on, on the radar, because it does sort of drop off. We're at that point where it's going to drop off.
Sure. Well, it is on our radar to request a renewal of that millage. I can't say definitively that we're going to keep the exact same amount. We will look at what our capital needs are based on a multi-year plan. But at this point, there isn't really a clear alternative if that millage were to fail. We don't typically fund any street improvements out of the general fund. That's usually from local and major streets. Those are Act 51 dollars that get allocated. So we're somewhat beholden to the state in terms of what we're going to receive in any given year. Certainly, we're still capable of doing some projects with that, or we may be capable of servicing some debt if we can put together a comprehensive plan. But it would become increasingly difficult to perform, especially local road projects without that millage.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure we kept that. The other thing is the future of the dam. I don't see any long-term allocation of dollars at this point for the dam.
So we do have under parks and parking lots, let's see, 25,000, 75,000, and 150,000 currently. And that's based on conversations with Spicer. But obviously, that's also going to rely significantly on council's direction regarding whether we repair the dam, or I should say, restore the dam to what we would like its capacity to be, or remove the dam.
Right, but, I mean, that seems like a nominal dollar amount in comparison to what we were talking about. We were talking millions, I believe, I thought.
Yep.
And I still think that's on the horizon, but but now, based on the 4 hours I've spent on the dam so far with Spicer, I'm getting a really good feeling that that's 5 years out. Because right now, the dam does meet current regulations, and I think it has something to do, don't quote me on this, but right now, I think we have to, something to do with the 100-year versus 500-year floodplain, and there's some speculation that at the state level that those regulations will increase. If those regulations will increase, we're looking at potentially millions of dollars in improvements to the dam. And that's when it might make sense to just look at millions of dollars to eliminate the dams. But right now, even though the dam is old, we're holding on. Those major improvements, I think, are more than 5 years out. So that's why we bumped those, because we don't believe although there's eyes on it, it'll take time for the regulations to come down and such. So I agree with you. It's a potential large expenditure, but now it's past this plan.
Okay,
But there's a caveat to that in terms of federal funding becoming available for the removal of dams at the state and federal level. You wouldn't want to miss out on those dollars or those opportunities by
Grant dollars.
limping the dam along for 5 years if those funds are significant enough to make it worthwhile.
Absolutely, and that is, I think, to Councilmember Co's point, why this is very much a living document. If an opportunity presents itself for us to secure federal funding for a project that we know is a priority, we're going to go after that. Any funding to support either dam rehabilitation or dam removal is very much on our radar, because either way, any sort of support we can get is going to tip the scale.
my next question is, we sort of have a nice little sliding scale for our vehicle replacement in here. Now, how does that align with our vehicle replacement fund?
It aligns beautifully, Janet. No, in all sincerity, a huge credit goes to Alex Link, to Director Searles, and Treasurer Bennett for working this out. But we have a really nice plan in place for normalizing that cost over time now, based on the initial seed funding we put into it. So you won't see these costs hit specifically as individual line items in budgets anymore, but we do still show it as a capital improvement expense.
Okay,
And
so,
this is exactly the equipment that the contribution rate is based off of. So we did a 6-year, and each year, as one year drops off, the other year will come on, and then each year in the spring, when they're doing their budget, they're gonna decide if, something that's maybe out in 27 needs to be moved up. But the amount that all the funds are contributing is based off of this 6-year document, and then it'll, contribute and look at it every year.
fantastic.
It's identical, mirrors, the DPW's identical.
If I can tag on that just real quick, have we considered, or are we abandoning the leasing of vehicles, or the one program we had, or, I'm just trying to understand that.
We're probably not going to look at that particular program again, but we are still very open to leasing in general. I think there were some internal issues with that particular source, but yes, right now the contributions are based on us making full-scale purchases of projects, but as long as interest rates remain competitive, very much so, we would continue looking at leasing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Dillon?
A water tower, a third water tower, would that be part of West Belt enhancements, or is that a separate thing?
Well, I consider that separate because the West Bell is named just for the sanitary systems, sanitary collection. The water tower is something that's, I think, needed for the water distribution system in the near future. Specifically, it's on the west side of the system is where we have our eye on for it, would be a benefit, just because of the elevation, because our existing water tower is on the east side of the system, and then the actual elevation gets higher on the west side of the system. So you're serving people that are higher off of the tower that's here, so you just don't get as much pressure on the west side of the system. Not to mention, we only have 600,000 gallons or so of storage throughout the system. So I do think it would be on the west side of the system, but the West Belt is a term, we have 3 belts of sewer collection, so the West Belt is very specific to the sanitary system.
Okay.
And one thing I'll say, you can correct me, I believe in FY23 currently, we're projecting to put some money towards location studies for a water tower. Because obviously at this point, we don't have a location or a location under control, so it will take time to identify suitable location, sizing, and then acquire that property. But if I can add on to that as well, the water tower, an additional well, likely some, obviously, additional distribution and collection system capacity are costs that we will need to assemble and put on developers, new developers that come into the community. It's not a cost that we're necessarily planning to have seen realized by current users of the system.
Okay. I think that's just one more question, actually. I think there's sort of two. I want to say to Mr. Strolls, I really appreciate that you said you're going to take another look and from a different vantage point of our PACER. I do think it needs to be updated. I still have some concerns. There's one road that it's Austin Drive, that has, I believe, been considered failed for 3 years, and we're all the way, we've got 5 more years before it kind of comes into rotation. I think that we do need to take a really hard new look at where our roads are and how they need to be addressed going forward. I know that's a small road, that's sort of a dead end, but I do think it just still has some merit in being repaired at some point. The last question I have is, and I know it's going to sound trivial, but it's just one of those sticking points for me. I've noticed that once again, the pickleball courts have been pushed off for another fiscal year into '23. We financed those, I think, through TIFA dollars more than 3 years ago, and I really don't like that we committed to something for our community. We took away an amenity with a promise that it was going to be replaced, and we keep kicking this down the road. I really, it's a funded project. I'd like to find the resources to make sure that it gets done sooner rather than later. It's just, there's these things that we've committed to, and what I don't want to see is those dollars get reallocated to another project because we haven't used them. There's always going to be needs, obviously, but it is something that we did commit to our community, and so I'd like to see those things kind of coming to fruition. And I don't know what that entails at this point, if it's that we don't have the internal staffing that needed to get that project off the ground, and we can earmark more dollars for it, or what that sort of reason is.
You-
That all sucks.
You want me to jump in
Yeah.
on this? Or you sure? I think I know in presenting this year's capital improvement plan, staff is presenting a plan that they feel that we have the capacity to execute. And when we talk about TIFA dollars being allocated to a specific project, unfortunately, there are numerous projects that TIFA contributes to, and as we've seen with the pump station modernization project, they're going over budget, and those TIFA dollars could be well spent to control those costs as well, rather than have to go back and realign our rate study information. To that point, we do want to execute on every single thing that's in this project plan, but we have to be realistic about the dollars that are available at any given time and the bids that we receive back. So I don't believe that there's any opportunity necessarily to expedite that with the staff that we have or the dollars that we're seeing things costing right now, unfortunately.
I just find that to be a shame that, like I said, it's been several years that project has been in the pipelines. And, for me, it's a quality of life issue. We want our residents to have that enriched environment. And, we took away that amenity with the promise of giving it back. And we're not doing that, and I feel like it's almost like a bait and switch. But, I know it's out there, and we're gonna get to it eventually, but, not today, not tomorrow, not next year. And at some point, we have to make good on our promises. And so I just wanna make sure that we're mindful of that when we go forward and we make promises about what we're doing in our community. Because, people bought into paving over Paradise for a parking lot with the idea that they were getting a brand-new tennis court. And I just struggle that we haven't been able to fulfill that.
And I don't disagree that is not the kind of precedent that we want to establish moving forward. I think we have a very different team here these days that places a higher priority on setting realistic expectations. So, I could say that, Carla, you're welcome to jump in, but, I could say that it will continue to be on our radar to do that, but there would need to be some changes in terms of our staff capacity and our funding capacity to be able to help with that.
I agree. I think it is an important project. As, when we took that amenity away, we did have the promise of additional resources, additional courts, and pickleball definitely is one of those needed in our community. It is something that it does take engineering to put that together and do that project. And I agree with what our manager says. It's capacity of bandwidth, what we can do. So I would like to have it done as soon as possible as well.
Right. So I've just gotten concerned because we have $90,000, so every year we're finding a new reason to spend that $90,000 elsewhere, it looks like? Or is it the same 90 that we're just carrying over and not doing anything with? Is what I'm trying to figure out.
So that's a TIFA allocation, so that carries forward.
Right. So there's dollars sitting there that we just haven't spent at this point. Correct?
I don't believe so. Is that
But TIFA has
an annual?
an annual allocation that they contribute to our funds. They haven't given us that money yet.
So based on the report I'm looking at right now, we have $90,000 identified in FY '24 out of those TIFA funds to build the pickle court. So the question would be, if you wanted to build the pickle court this year, we would have to forego the Riverwalk, the tennis court project.
Well, I think the
Some of those?
reason one of the reasons pickleball has been getting pushed out is being able to making a pickleball court a priority on an engineer to lay out and design and get all that done. That's the piece we're missing, is trying to get all that paperwork. And we've had bigger projects that we put our engineer dollars towards, and I think that's where the holdup. And that's why, because even if we had the $90,000, I don't believe we have a solid plan yet.
I mean, that's what the question that if I'm understanding correctly, would be that you would have to reallocate funds, not only to do an engineering plan, but also to try and do it in the next fiscal year. But that means foregoing some other project.
Right.
Joanne, am I correct? Yeah. So we're spending that $90,000 this year for these projects. Maybe last year we identified $90,000 for it. You're right. So the question is, do you forego these 4 projects and attempt to try and reorganize and do it all?
Right.
Or do we take recommendations from staff and hope that we can do the $90,000 pickleball next year?
No, that's fine, I understand, and I know in the big scheme of things, we're talking about drinking water, we're talking about major infrastructure. Pickleball seems nominal, and I get that, and that's not what I'm trying to get at. I'm just trying to understand, if we had earmarked it 3 years ago, where are those dollars?
We spend them on other projects, right? Or, are they?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they're being raised by. So every year Tifa, when we capture the taxes, Tifa, we collect money from Tifa. Those allocations are determined each year. So this $90,000 for this year maybe went somewhere else in the project. It's not like Tifa paid us and it's sitting in a savings account. It's that we have it on the radar, and then when Tifa, each year when we do both budgets, we say, okay, this is gonna go to pickleball, then it'll come into the general fund, and then it'll pay for those expenses. So it's not like it's just sitting here not doing anything. It's been reallocated until it needs to align with the actual project.
Right.
Is that?
And generally what happens is we have more expenditures than we have TIFA dollars. So that there may be ability, if we haven't done a project, we reallocate those TIFA dollars towards that project, saving the general fund. So
Right.
if the project isn't, not that we've lost the money, it's just it was been spent differently.
And I think I'd like to see a different process going forward then when we do that, because like I said, I don't want to commit to something that is unfunded or the funds are swayable. I mean, if we're going to commit to it, we're going to commit to it, because there's always going to be something that's going to trump pickleball. So I just want to know how we get to that.
And if I can fill in, I think generally what we do is, Mickey Joe has in the past provided us with budget amendments that Joanne also does, that identifies throughout the year whether we're going to be able to achieve that, and we have to re-identify if those funds are not going to be used for that, if I'm correct.
Right, the alphabet order.
I think what, you're making a great point is that what has happened in the past, we don't want to see that reoccur. And now
Right.
we want to understand more appropriately, but I believe we do have that in place. It's just how do we highlight those more and to achieve that? And our goal going forward is not to do what we've done in the past.
Right, and that's really
And
the point that
I
I'm
can
getting
concur
at
with you.
too. And it's what I'm not trying to point any fingers or say anything. I just want to make sure that we have a process in place that if we're going to, I understand it's a fluid document, it's a fluid plan, that's how things work, and obviously. But I do want to make sure though that, at some point we actually get to these things, that we have to say, you know what, we did commit to this, and so we are going to do it.
And with your pet project of this one, my pet project is city sidewalks.
Well,
That's been 10 years, and that's an issue that's been putting on and off, and I think Mr. Searles is coming up with a plan for that. But I agree, those are the things. Once we identify this, we as council need to make those a priority
right,
and not necessarily continue to add projects on top of those. That's where I think we run into our
yes.
difficulty. But we will hold staff accountable for that, and I think we always do.
Yep.
Kevin?
Yes, this question I think is for Carla. How often do we get donations, such as for the Teff Park tennis courts? And when we have a donation, I assume that we want to do that project right away.
Right. That donation, we did not solicit for that donation, so there's an interested party from the Reddy's Foundation that took that and actually got the money for us. We're in the process of, we hired a consultant to give us the actual, they're gonna do like bounce tests and do a thorough testing of the courts to see what actually needs to be done on that. If it does end up costing more, we're hoping and have been assured that the Reddy's Foundation will be funding that as well. So that's kind of a one-off.
Okay.
It's a unique situation. But we do apply towards whatever grant opportunities that we have. For example, CARES grants, DNR. We haven't. The last one we did was Salt Springs and Rec Passport, which we did not receive the Rec Passport. But Washington County grants, we apply for whatever we have. We research a little bit, figure out what we need. So.
Yeah, I understand you
Tough
work,
one was a one-off.
yeah, that you work really hard on trying to get grant money, so this is good karma that the Reddy's Foundation is donating that money, so something we should definitely be thankful for.
And that project is a good one. If everybody's looking at the general fund page, you'll see where we have $45,000 in FY '23 for that court project, and then we have a donation for 45. Carla has been pretty much assured that if it's additional cost, that would be covered, but you'll see that we didn't anticipate that because it's only, there's no donation down there at the bottom, because it's not a guarantee. So if it says donations, we're pretty certain. And, I mean, so that's just a good example of when we count on our donations.
Okay. And then, do we have any bonds coming off the books?
Debt bonds?
Yeah, debt bonds.
Yep, we have, so which books? For citywide?
Yes.
Joanne, you probably know off the top of your head, don't you? No? Okay, I'll look it up.
You don't have to find it right now, if that's,
No,
I would
I'm-
just be interested in,
I'm looking at our shared financial site that we put out there, which is an easy click of the button. And at FY '21, the street bonds, as Joanne said, we've got, yeah, she pretty much nailed them right out there. 22, or the next one would be coming off 24. Yeah.
and how much does that help us? Or is that more of a nominal, we have bonds, new bonds, and then we have some of these other bonds that come off?
Well, the only ones that are coming off that are going to make a contribution into the general fund would be anything in the rec center, which comes off in '25. And then we have another refunding, yeah, that comes off in '25. Those would be the only ones that would impact the general fund.
Okay,
The debt for the streets, when that comes off, that'll just reduce a little bit of our millage, it'll free up a little bit of millage allocation.
okay.
But-
Thank you for looking that up so easily.
Yep.
And actually, I think one of those things is the consideration of looking at our debt to service some of these, because although it is good to always pay your bills and hopefully pay them on time, there's one thing here that we need the realization of that we may not have the funds to do that, and debt servicing is one of the ways to acquire it, especially when you can get debt servicing at a lower dollar value. So I think that's one of the things Ms. O'Toole has mentioned to me before, is that we would be looking at that also in terms of some of this, because in order to accomplish this, we may have to do that. And I don't know if that'll be another discussion at some other point, but
Well, is it, the question was asked, what do we anticipate to do for street bonds? And as you may recall, prior to our debt, or prior to the authorization to levy that street millage, all of our street projects were done by debt issuance in the past years. So, it'd be about our only other option at this point to go forward.
right. And that's why it's going to be very important to renew the road millage.
Yes.
It's the only way we're going to accomplish it, and I think you get exactly what you're getting, new roads, improved infrastructure. Any other questions?
Yeah,
Kevin?
I meant to ask this one. So with regards to rising interest rates, how do we factor that into forecasting our needs? The Fed's going to meet 6 more times this year and is likely to bump rates at least a quarter each time, depending upon inflation. It could be more. So we could easily, at least for interest, mortgage interest rates, we're above 4. We could easily be at 5 by the end of the year, and next year even up to, so that really compounds the cost of funds. And we haven't had to deal with this in a while, fortunately. We've had the benefit of it going down. So how do we look at that and make sure that we capture savings, if you will, or lower cost of interest costs as we look at some of these capital improvement projects?
Sure. Well, one, if you recall, that's kind of why we preemptively went after a little over an $8 million bond last year to lock in very favorable interest rates. And that is obviously funding our projects through about fiscal year 24 at this point. Certainly the bulk of what we need financed next year. So we're insulated a little bit in that regard because we've already got the funds in the bank. But the other major factor is right now, the biggest bond issuance that we're looking at is a state revolving fund. And the state revolving fund interest rates are typically lower than market. And if you recall, when we did the rate study, we did still estimate a rather conservative interest rate, and then we created a worst case scenario.
Right.
So we do have both of those projections available to us, and at this point, we're watching closely, but certainly, I think we're at a point where we're very seriously considering whether we need to lock in any additional debt now while those rates are still favorable to get us through the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. Okay, great. I'm not in favor of any more debt than necessary, and debt is one of those four-letter words, but as far as costs go for funds, I'm glad you're on top of it. Thank you.
Yep. At this point, the only sort of debt issuance we're looking at is SRF, but again, just because of the nature of the pricing that we've seen, it is entirely possible we would want to pursue another small debt issuance.
Okay. Thank you.
With that, if there's no other questions, any other statements?
I just have one statement.
Oh, thank you.
The document that Colleen handed out tonight, the capital improvement document, the total amount and the orange copy that you have, there is a difference. And I just wanted to point out that the document, the online document that you have there, includes the $37,000 water valve replacement program, and it also includes an additional $5,000 that Historic snuck in at the end that I included in that document that's not in the one that had already went to out to council. So when you look at it and you say, oh, these don't balance, that's why, just as a heads up.
I was glad you saved us $32,000 that you didn't spend everything. Thank you. With that, I left absences to the end, but I see the mayor's here now, but motion to excuse the mayor, or shall we just move ahead with his, yeah, you were here, so. Do I have a motion to excuse the mayor?
So moved.
Second.
Move Kraus, second Camaro Sulak. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
With that, do I have a motion to adjourn at 6:44? Move DeLarco, second Dillon. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
I'd like to call the Saline City Council meeting to order. If you please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening. For those of you in the audience tonight, you may sign in the back to my left. There are also copies of the agenda on the back table along with hearing devices. If you'd be so kind to turn off your electronic devices or put them to vibrate, the chair would appreciate that. Members present this evening are myself, Mayor Marl, Council Members CO, Dillon, Delorco, Kamara Sulak, Kraus, and Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh. From city staff, we have City Manager O'Toole, Clerk Royal, Assistant City Manager Getzman, City Engineer Humphreys, Wastewater Treatment Superintendent Briggs, Parks and Rec Director Scruggs, DPW Director Searles, and Attorney Sweats. At this time, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda. It's actually technically going to be as amended because there is a new item that will appear under the consent portion of the agenda. It'll be agenda item C-22-74. This will be a resolution authorizing execution and delivery of an installation purchase agreement. The city manager just emailed you a copy of the resolution, probably within the last 5 to 10 minutes. And again, when we get to the consent agenda, if you'd like that removed for council discussion, that would be appropriate.
Moved as amended.
Moved as amended by Councilmember CO, and that's seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh. Is that correct, sir? Okay. Hearing no additional discussion, all those in favor of approving the agenda as amended signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. There are no absences this evening, so we'll proceed to citizen comments on agenda items. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested, but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Please. You will have 3 minutes. Yes, yep.
My name is Kent Borland. I live about a few hundred yards north of the city. But I consider myself a resident of Saline. I come this evening because I want to share some observations about the rec center here. And I'm just going to list a couple of observations, and then I want to make a few comments to you.
Mr. Borland, I apologize, but this citizen comment period is limited to comments on agenda items. So if you'd like to speak to the rec center, we would love to hear your comments, either expressed verbally or in writing, but you will have to refrain until the second public comment period at the end of tonight's agenda.
Oh, then if I quit talking, I can talk later.
Definitely.
Thank you.
I
Thank you.
apologize for interrupting you.
Well, thank you, it's all right.
All right.
Mary Hess. And it's regarding the onboarding members for boards and commissions. Mayor Morrow has asked many times for the city residents to offer their time to serve on city commissions. I have over the years put in a couple applications. The last one was signed for support by 5 council members, present council members. Years ago, when I was on council, the council would get together to talk about appointments. And I was wondering why the requests aren't sent to the city manager and then dispersed on to the city council, who later vote on it. Mayor Morrow, you chose not to reappoint me again to the Environmental Commission a couple years ago. I believe I have to be better than an empty chair. I understand it is hard getting a quorum together now. In fact, I understand the Environment Commission couldn't even have a quorum. My suggestions for those that are kind enough to put in an application is that a thank you note be sent to those that are applying, since they are offering their free time. And what is the criteria for being chosen to serve? Not just because, I would hope it's not just because you can't, because I'm 83 years old. And also a note might be sent to those as far as who are on the commission in January, so people know that they will or will not be serving. It's almost April, so I assume I will not be recognized again, but I will submit another application. Thank you, sir.
Are there any additional citizen comments on agenda items? Clerk Royal, were there any correspondence emailed to your office in advance of tonight's meeting in which the individual wanted their comments read at this time? No, sir. Very good. Then we will proceed to the first of two presentations. First up is the 2021 annual report from the city's Parks Commission. Director Scruggs, would you like to begin and then yield the floor to, we're delighted to have one of our Parks Commissioners with us tonight. Thank you for your time.
I'm going to yield the floor automatically to Jason Shields. He is was our vice chair, as you can see on the presentation.
It comes down.
Good evening. Hopefully I don't break the technology part of this, because that's usually what I do.
Jason, you're just going to push enter.
Perfect. All right, we'll make this somewhat brief, but these are the agenda items we're going to talk about. First up is we have some accomplishments that we accomplished last year. One of our big ones is the Green Thumb Award. It's a very popular project that we have every year. We'll keep that up. We'll go over the annual park cleanup that we did at Curtis Park. We also partnershiped with the River Raisin Watershed Council, and that has got us some really good things going on within the community. This is my park, so I live real close to Brecken Park, and the paved path was completed. So for us runners out there, this is a fantastic, nice little loop to add to our normal daily runs. We have the Mill Pond Riverwalk, as well as we started some fly fishing instructions with Dirk, which from the feedback we've received has been absolutely fantastic. Fast forward to Green Thumb. We had 30 nominations last year, and this goes across both business categories as well as residential. Our business category winner was the Saline Senior Center, and our residential category winners were Becky Fox, Rebecca and Michael Godick, and Angel and, I'm not sure if that's supposed to be Keith, but Klickner. So. The park that we chose this last year to clean up was Curtis Park. We had several volunteers come out, which is always helpful. It's not just us park commissioners out there. We were able to clear a lot of the brush and growth along the riverbanks. It helps with the viewing spots along the river for the park users. We cleaned up the mow line on the protruding branches, smoothed out a lot of the dips in the safety surfaces that get rough a bit over the year. Planted several canna lily tubers in the landscape area close to the bridge. And then, as always, at the time of year, try to steer clear of the poison ivy. We've been talking about this for a while, but we created a partnership with the River Raisin Watershed Council, and we've been partnering with one of their staff to work directly with the Park Commission monthly to create these nature walks. These have been really, really phenomenal. As you can see here, we had several throughout the year, one per month. And we had over 95 people attend these events, and we're already scheduling the same type of thing into 2022, especially for some of the younger generation. This is really awesome to get people outdoors and get them interested in one. I've already told my daughter about the owl walk that will be going on in November of this year, and I have not heard anything different about owls for the last week and a half. One of the items that has been on my list for quite some time since I've been here in the city of Saline is to connect the two paths in Brecken Park. And so we were able to get that accomplished last year, and it now has a full 3/4 of a mile walking loop on the perimeter of the park. And for those of us runners, it is almost exactly 3/4 of a mile, just shy. Another one of the areas that we try to talk about in terms of like connecting parks, but we need these walks, right, so that we can continue to use the parks. And we've been successful in receiving a couple of the different Connecting Communities grants last year. The first up, we had $40K covered for the design and engineering of the actual Riverwalk. And the second grant that we were given was in the amount of $200,000 for the first phase of the project, so we'll continue to push that as we move forward in 2022. Speaking of 2022, these are some of the things that we'll be looking at over the course of the next few months. We're going to update our 5-year master plan. We're going to continue to develop the Salt Springs Park, continue and apply for the grant funding that helps us do many of the things that you see in the parks today. There's some play equipment that we'll be replacing in Marpool and Curtis Park, as well as replacement of a broken spring rider at Colony. My kids will like that. And there's a memorial bench to be installed in Curtis Park, honoring the SHS class of 1968. So a few of the events that we'll have in 2022, we'll have our Arbor Day tree planting. It'll be in April. Again, we'll be having the Green Thumb Award program. We'll be starting it in May this year, and it'll end in June 30th. We'll continue our Nature Series events for the monthly different walks that we do, and that's going to run from March through November. We'll have a trail work day, August 13th at Wilderness Park, and we are still looking to see what we'll do for the annual park cleanup for the fall of this year. That's it.
Very good, Chairperson. We thank the Chairperson of the Parks Commission for attending tonight. Before I open it up for any questions, let me first defer to Councilmember Dillon, who served as the Parks Commission liaison in 2021. Councilmember Dillon, is there anything you'd like to add for the record?
I would just like to start by thanking all the park commissioners. It's a great group of people that bring a lot to the table, a lot of expertise, and definitely people that are willing to step in and get their hands and feet dirty, because that's definitely needed at times. But there were two things that you didn't mention that I'm going to mention, and hopefully I'm not stepping on anybody's toes. One was that we were able to partner with area civic groups to repaint and refresh some of our park signs, which they were in need of, and that's kind of, we're slowly getting through the inventory of those. So if you have a group that would like to paint a sign, there's a whole system, and we provide all of the materials for you. The other one that I was very excited about is the rehabilitation of the Max Adler Trail that's in process, and we were able to partner again with the River Raisin Watershed liaison, who had great knowledge, and so that's still a work in progress, but there's some really great things that are happening at that trail, and I think it's gonna really, bring a lot of people back down into that area of the park.
Thank you very much.
Good catches, thank you.
Director Scruggs, anything you'd like to add for the record?
No, I think that was great, thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Councilmember Dillon. Any questions for our Parks Commission Chair? Easy enough. Jason, thank you very much. Appreciate your time this
Have a good
evening.
night.
Thank you for your service.
We have another presentation, so I believe it's going to come back down.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that, Ben. You're gonna have to lower that. Ben?
I thought it was off the hook.
Yeah.
Okay, we proceed to the second presentation, which is an update on the wastewater treatment project plan. Mr. Rubel, are you taking the lead on this?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Briggs, are you assisting? Okay, easy enough. Well, again, Brian, as soon as the screen is down, the PowerPoint appears on the screen, you may begin.
It's on this screen, but not my screen. I'm not sure
Give us maybe a second.
where the disconnect is.
Click off of that.
I think you got it.
Can you see it off that? Just hit enter.
I can. Can we get rid of that bar on the right, that toolbar?
Why is it doing that? For some reason, this thing's not working.
we could work without it, as long as we can advance, right?
You hit enter. Yep, you hit enter. Not working. You know what? No, don't want to do that. There we go. Why is it not presenting? Arrows.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks, Pat. Well, good evening, Council, Mayor. I'll go through some slides that kind of bring you up to date with the planning for the wastewater treatment plant project, and in particular, the term project plan, which is actually the application or part of the application needed to secure the state's low-interest loan program, as the title indicates. So just by way of status, a couple of steps that we've already achieved. May remember we talked about the infiltration inflow study late last summer, which has been completed and approved by Eagle. That was a necessary prerequisite to get to this point. And the sewer system evaluation survey is a fancy name for the smoke testing that went on in the city last summer and fall. That has been completed this winter, and it is under review with Eagle right now. I literally hope to hear any day on that and get comments from them. The next milestone is the submission of a draft project plan. The staff at Eagle would like to see a draft ahead of the final plan, and that's a good step to get comments, refine it so it can be the best it can be. And I'll talk to you about the next steps with that, both tonight and the future months that are coming up. The project we have broken into phases, and I will call it phase 1, which is the green, and phase 2, which is the orange color. And just to go through a few components of that, I'll start with phase 1. Would include a new pumping facility into the wastewater plant, along with a fine screen to remove particulates in the wastewater stream. That's in the lower left corner of the diagram in the rectangular box. Would also include an equalization tank to assist smooth out the flow during wet weather events. That's a very strong contributor to some of the challenges at the wastewater plant, are these big spikes that occur during wet weather. And that tank will help capture that water and then slowly dewater it back when the storm has subsided. Also some clarifier work, both a primary clarifier, which is kind of the first major step in the process on the left side, and secondary clarifier up in the northern part of the facility. Also represented on the right side are two existing clarifiers. There will be some modest modifications to those clarifiers to improve their performance. The digester in the lower right corner has a cover that's 35 years old and is in need of some attention. It's been part of your asset management plan for several years. So phase 1 would be a great time to address that cover. In the middle of the diagram to the left are just some, is more the solids handling part of the plant. We've talked a couple of times last year about converting and improving your solids handling process. We've moved that location slightly. It's now more in the middle of the site. We think that's advantageous to do it there, giving it some more thought. Then phase 2 is to further expand the plant, more of a growth type of a component. We would have both a new primary clarifier in the lower left and a fourth secondary clarifier in the upper right. And the big part of Phase 2 would be converting your RBCs, getting away from that as your biological treatment and moving to more of a conventional activated sludge, which is more of a fluidized process. That's represented by the 3 rectangular boxes there on the upper part of the diagram. That would be the aeration tank. Now, there are parts of Phase 1 that could be moved to Phase 2, and there are parts of Phase 2 that could be moved to Phase 3, depending on costs and so forth. So there is some flexibility here. I wasn't going to go through each of those decisions tonight, but there is some flexibility as we move along to be able to move projects forward or backwards. One of the council members told me at the beginning of the meeting that I have been bringing good news lately. I appreciated that because I knew this slide has some bad news on it. And I was in front of you last August, I believe, and I presented the 2021 cost opinions for Phase 1 on the left of $39 to $45 million. And on the right, it has grown, and that is almost exclusively due to what we're all seeing in the hardware store and the grocery store these days. It has hit construction market extremely hard. The last 3 or 4 months, construction costs have absolutely exploded. I think we saw a little bit of that with the pump station bid in December. We were all surprised at some of those costs, and clearly we were seeing the beginning stages of that then, and it has only gotten worse the last couple of months. We did update the cost. We have taken a number of bids recently for similar type wastewater projects, so we had some very good data to prepare that last column, but unfortunately, it was good data, but bad results. There have been some slight modifications to the process, but that is not the bulk of that cost. The solids handling, we did add a tweak to that process. Actually, we think the I&I rehab might go down in cost from what we had in 2021. So I talked about the phases, and I think it's important just to revisit those briefly. Phase 1 largely is to handle that wet weather peak that causes the challenges at the wastewater plant. It will also allow, because we're managing that peak, it would allow you to continue to grow inside the city, your current service area. Phase 2 starts to actually then have more growth associated with it, even outside of the current service area. I've talked about the flexibility that we could move projects from 1 to 2 if needed. The other thing that I'm a little leery about is I have not received comments from Eagle on that SSCS report. That could change the size of some of the facilities, which would change the cost. So it's the best guess at what I can give you. It's what we're going to have to submit April 1st, but when I come back this summer and we have our public hearing, those might change again due to Eagle's comments. I think I went through that slide, the reason the costs have changed. Just a timeline again. We will apply for these funds at the end of June. It will indicate starting construction in the fall of next year. That can be moved again as needs arise. And that Phase 1 is the $56 million. 2 other projects, or at least timelines that are in there. We've included the West Belt trunk sewer replacement in the loan, a couple years out, calendar year 2025, and also included some structural repairs of the sewer system. We'll do some of the I&I repairs in the first phase, and then maybe some structural repairs a couple years from now. And then we have put the second phase at the 5th year. The project plan timeline is a 5-year plan, so we have put that at year 5. Again, if the growth isn't there to support it, you don't have to do the project. But I'd rather have it in the plan if the growth comes earlier. Now, there's a caveat with the project plan. It's a great source of funding, but it has some limitations about funding growth and sprawl. So we are not promoting that in the project plan, but there is the chance that when we come to do the calendar year 2025, actually more like the Phase 2 project, because it is largely a growth project, there is a chance that that may not be funded through the SRF program. I just want to be clear of that. The West Belt is sized right now for your current service area. You likely need to make that sewer slightly bigger for a growth scenario, and because of that, a portion or all of that also may not be fundable through SRF. But I'd rather ask for it now and have them say no than to miss our opportunity to do that. So our next steps, I'm still waiting on comments from that smoke testing report. I really expected those last week, but Eagle moves at Eagle speed. We will also get comments on this project plan after we submit it, April 1st. We have scheduled then, the project plan needs to be on a 30-day public notice, and then we have a hearing after the end of the 30 days. We have tentatively scheduled to publish the project plan in early May, and to be back here at your June 6th council meeting to have the hearing. Now, that can be pushed back depending on city's needs or Eagle's comments. We just have to get that hearing in by June 30th. That's our tentative plan at this point. So I thank you for the opportunity to get you this far, and we have some hard work the next few months to get that project plan in. And
It's a good update,
yeah.
and it's a nice PowerPoint, Mr. Rubel, and I guess I would ask of staff is if we can be sure to disseminate this and maybe have a hard copy in the lobby and put it on our website. I think it's of interest to our constituents, and we talk a lot about these issues, and they have they have to know where we're at, the planning and execution of a significant rehab for our wastewater treatment facility. Superintendent Briggs, before we open up for any questions, anything you'd like to add for the record?
Not at this time.
Easy enough. Then let me start on one end of the dais, and I'll end at the other with Councilmember Kraus. Mr. Delorco, questions for Mr. Rubel or staff?
You mentioned something about a change in the solids handling component of the design phase. The costs are more than double what was projected. Is that due to the design change, or is that due to the cost associated with inflation?
Both have caused that increase.
Okay.
Yep.
So what is the meat of the design change?
Actually, Mr. Briggs and my staff had the same idea at the same time. I was hearing it from both of them that, we really ought to think about this, and kind of two things came together. It's strictly a small tank upstream of this press that we've talked about that will thicken the biosolids before it is pressed. That extends the life of the digester. It makes the pressing easier. It creates less upsets in the digester too. So there are advantages to doing that.
Okay. So refresh my memory, at one point earlier in the discussions, were the decommissioning of the RBCs part of phase 1, or did they get moved to phase 2?
To my knowledge, it has always been part of Phase 2.
Okay, all right.
Or Phase 3, yeah.
So the aeration tank is what obviates the need for the RBCs?
I'm sorry, it's what obsoletes the RBC?
Obviates, yeah, we know,
Yeah.
that's what enables us
They-
to discontinue the RBCs.
That's correct. They perform the same function, biological treatment.
Okay, okay. So we'll have to keep the RBCs along until phase 2 with the current design?
That is correct.
Okay, all right. That's all the questions we have.
Thank you, Mr. Delorco. Mayor Pro Tem Giovanni, any questions for our guest or city staff?
Not tonight, I've really gone over this with the task force, so I'd rather hear the council questions.
And on behalf of City Council and staff, please thank the members of the task force, in particular, our two private citizens, Mr. Dearbaugh, for their support. And obviously, we benefit in innumerable ways having two separate set of eyes review this material and provide feedback and ask questions. We appreciate that very much. Councilmember Dillon, questions for either our guest or city staff?
Sure. So starting with the RBCs, they're a phase 2 piece. But we've started to see that we're kind of getting some wear and tear on them. Do we really feel like we can put another 5 years of expense into them? Is it worth it? Is there a way to roll them into phase 1 and sort of change the flow somehow?
there is no easy way to roll that into phase one. It can be with money. I mean,
Right,
that's,
everything can be done with money.
absolutely. You will continue to put money into the RBCs from now until when they're changed. I can't tell you that won't happen.
Right.
They were inspected by the manufacturer, and I think they thought that 3 to 5 years, they would generally make it that long, but with preventative maintenance along the way.
Right. Because I know that, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Briggs, at our last meeting or 2 meetings ago, we allocated some significant dollars for some repair for one, and we've got 18 of them. So, you know, are we just going to have to hopefully just limp along?
Well, we're gonna be hopeful, yes, definitely.
Okay.
I mean, like I said last time we were at the meeting, that, you know, this one broke, but it also had some other things happen to it before it broke. So there's probably an indicator that something was wrong with that one RBC. We haven't seen any of those issues yet on any of the other ones.
Find some wood, please. Start knocking. No, well, okay, well, I appreciate that. That's good news, because I don't want to keep making financial investments into a throwaway piece.
I understand that.
And so, now, keeping on the RBCs, will we abandon them in place, or?
Well, you will discontinue their use. I would assume that you will take those off-site. You will recycle the parts, for
Okay.
instance.
Okay, do they have value?
Scrap value, you know, it's,
Okay.
rather than just be an eyesore, it'd probably be a good idea just to get them off the site, I
Right.
guess is what I'm saying.
So, my question is, beyond the cost increases, is there workforce availability at this point to complete projects in our timetable? Because I know that that's sort of a hand-in-glove type situation.
I've taken 4 or 5 bids over the last 6 months, and I've had some bids where I've had 5 to 8 contractors, been very happy with the work, the competition. I have a bid due this Thursday that I'm begging contractors to look at. So I can't tell you where we will be in 18 months when that bids, but it's something to keep an eye on.
Okay. And then my last question is about the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act dollars.
Yes.
So if we were to receive any of that money, would we be able to accelerate any of our programs? Would we be able to add on, or are we just looking as an, and this is probably for the city manager, to just offset those costs?
At this point, because of what's happening with the pricing of infrastructure and materials, certainly if we got any of those federal dollars, they'd be used to offset this project so that we could complete the entire scope. If, for example, if we were to be fortunate enough to get a 30% allocation or principal forgiveness, that would actually put us back to where we were when we were planning this like 2 years ago. So that'd be a big win for our ratepayers. Certainly, if there's bigger opportunities than that, yes, that's why we're writing the project plan to include that 5-year scope. Hopefully, we'd be able to make some moves quicker.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Seal, questions for our guests or city staff?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Rubel, on your plan, just north of the proposed screening and influent pump station, these 3 clarifiers, is there one of those that exists now that's out of service?
I'm not sure I can scroll back. I can.
There's
Okay.
3 of them there. There's a white one, a green one, and an
Yep.
orange one.
Yeah, I can explain that. The green and the orange ones, the circles that are drawn there are over the top of a footprint of a current tank
Okay.
that has been abandoned. Those were your trickling filters, built, I believe, in 1948.
Okay.
We actually spent a fair amount of time trying to evaluate whether those concrete tanks would be usable for the future. And the concrete is in such poor shape, I think I think we would be farther behind trying to use those than excavating and starting anew.
Okay, thank you, that's my question.
That's a great question.
Thank you, Mr. Seal. Councilmember Kamara Sulak, questions for our guests or city staff?
Yes, thank you for bringing the truth to the table. Now, looking at the cost increases that we've already seen, and I know we're cost conscious. If there's, it seems reasonable to me to, any way that we can to accelerate of getting rid of the RBCs and getting the activated sludge installed could be a twofold, being the unknown costs to keep the maintenance of the RBCs and of getting it to a more efficient process. I'd be worried if we could do that sooner than later, or any part of this that of putting it off could lead to another 30% increase in costs. And lastly, I'm hitting you with a lot, I know. Is there any way to get contractors that will be hopefully doing this work, have this on their radar come 2 years from now? And
I can answer your second question better than I can your first. That's a great suggestion. I would think once you start design, the design consultant will do a good job of reaching out to the relationships in the contracting industry to inform them this project's coming and certainly solicit their interest. If that is me, I can make that commitment to you, absolutely.
okay, great. And then the hard question.
It's all money, right? I mean, we can do the aeration tank in phase one. It's just going to move well over half of that $28 million from phase two to phase one. That's clearly your decision. I can write the plan either way.
Can you put together a proposal of how that would change the costs and
Yeah.
what it would look like?
I'm gonna throw out somewhere on the $10 million number. So it would make phase one, instead of 57, 58, I forgot what it was, it would make it 68. Or 66, plus or minus a little bit that I'd have to check in the office.
I mean, I understand that's a lot of money. But if we can save $5 million in the long run, and with the efficiencies that would bring us, and I'm a little worried about how much we're going to be spending on maintenance and repair and replacement costs for those RBCs. They've been buggers for a long time. So I think we should consider that, if we may, to get a better idea of what that would look like. Because this is a long-term plan, so I firmly believe in cost savings over the long term if we have the money and if we can figure out a way to make it work.
Obviously, I can do it. I just pretty much need direction today or tomorrow to make the draft submittal next week. The phase one was the plan that staff had and Tetra Tech had come up with, so.
Okay.
Well, we can make modifications between the draft and the final submit.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong, yeah, you can. Yeah, you would just, I strongly suspect from talking to SRF that lots of people's plans are changing rapidly, so I just was trying to keep in good graces with them the best I could and try to hit it as close as I could the first time.
Okay. One more thought on that. If any of these parts of this project are delayed because of, supply chain, being able to get the materials, the labor, I don't know how I know we can't plan for that, but that is one area. If we can plan for something sooner, we can avoid it being delayed and maybe being pushed to phase 3? If we try to
Yeah.
get the activated sludge installed and decommission the RBCs sooner than later, if we plan for it now and it doesn't quite happen as soon, in the first phase.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Maybe you could we take alternates in our bids quite often, so that if the pricing, and many of those things in phase 1, we would take as alternates. So if the pricing comes in high, we collectively can make the decision to push things into phase 2.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Councilmember Commissioner. Councilmember Kraus, questions for our guest or for city staff?
Thank you. Just a quick comment. Ms. Dillon and I went to the Michigan Municipal League Conference this week, and we sat in on some seminars, mostly about water, but a lot of the rules are the same with what Eagle is looking at, and they did stress on more than one occasion, no new growth, nothing to do with growth. They will not, which you already know, which is good, but they were hitting that pretty hard. They did also say a lot of communities are dealing with some of this, and other people that we networked with, you don't feel quite so alone. So for whatever that's worth.
Very good. Good. Yep.
Mr. Delarco, did you have an additional comment,
I
sir?
just had one point of,
No, you're good.
line of inquiry. To Councilman Camaro-Sulak's point about expediting the aeration tank in place of the RVCs, I see that a secondary, the addition of a secondary clarifier is part of phase 1, and the modification of the existing secondary clarifiers. What would it look like if we were to substitute not adding that third secondary clarifier and went with the aeration tank instead?
The clarifier is fairly critical to capacity.
Okay.
So it's two different items. You're substituting an O&M item for a capacity item. So you would not achieve your capacity expansion if you drop that clarifier.
But we effectively increased the capacity by adding the equalization tank, correct?
Very much. Well, yes, you have.
Okay.
It's all incremental, yeah.
Absent any additional growth over the next 3 years, significant growth, and the addition of the equalization tank, I mean, I'm not the engineer here. I know that the reason that the secondary clarifier, the third secondary clarifier has been added is to increase capacity, and that is definitely a goal of this project. But I'm just trying to brainstorm for ways in which we can decommission the RBC sooner rather than later. If that's a crucial element for phase 1, then it is what it is.
I mean, internally, staff and us talked about, the discretionary parts of that are things like the solids handling.
Right.
You could delay the solids handling, use your sludge storage tanks that you have, and push solids handling to phase 2.
Okay.
That would be the first place we would look. Obviously, there's benefits to doing solids handling.
That's the biggest bang for the buck, because that's a $9 million renovation.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right. So there's your $10 million that you were looking for to level it out.
Yeah, that's not necessarily a capacity issue, solids handling, as much as a regulatory and O&M type of issue.
Right, but with Eagle's permit requirements getting more stringent,
At some point, it may
yeah, okay.
become a regulatory issue.
Also something to be concerned about, sure, okay.
Let's do this to wrap up the conversation. Unless there's objections, let's proceed with the draft submittal to Eagle, which, if I recall from a previous slide, is due at the beginning of next month.
Yeah, next Friday.
Friday.
Yeah.
And then an ask of City Manager O'Toole, based on the conversation and comments around RBCs and maybe fast-tracking their removal, perhaps between yourself, Mr. Briggs, Mr. Rubel, and any other stakeholders you want to engage, you can sharpen your pencils a little bit and take another look at that, and perhaps report out in a subsequent meeting.
Well, I think my recommendation would be is that we just simply include it in the project plan, but as a bid alternate and move forward with that plan so that SRF has our intentions documented from the beginning.
Seems reasonable to me. Is there any objection from the dais?
No.
No? Okay. All right, easy enough. Any last questions or comments for Mr. Rubel before we excuse him? Very good.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I believe now you can raise the screen. Thank you. Okay, moving on tonight's agenda, we come to the consent agenda. The following consent agenda will normally be adopted without discussion. However, at the request of any citizen or council member, any item may be removed from the consent agenda for council discussion. Actually, technically speaking, it would be a motion to amend, to approve the consent agenda as amended unless you want to remove item C-22-74.
Move as submitted.
Move as, you mean as
Well,
amended? Amended. Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Gearbox to approve as amended. Is there a second? I'm sorry, did I miss the second?
Second.
I'm sorry, Kevin. Moved by Councilmember Camara Sulak. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda as amended signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 22-76. This is ordinance number 834, an ordinance to add adult use marijuana establishments. Let's start with just a motion to acknowledge receipt of the March 2nd, 2022 memo from Deputy Clerk Ritchie.
So moved.
Moved again by Mayor Pro Tem Gearbox, seconded by Councilmember Camara Sulak. I'm going to let Attorney Forshee begin, and then I will yield the floor to Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh in the event that he would like to comment as our liaison to the Planning Commission. So, Mr. Forshee, you may unmute yourself. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. So before you tonight, actually, there are going to be two ordinances. One coming to you from the Planning Commission, which is the zoning ordinance portion of allowing recreational marijuana in Saline. And the other one is the regulatory ordinance, which puts into place, as you may recall from the medical, all the licensing pieces of the puzzle. So as far as the zoning goes, it mirrors very closely the medical marijuana ordinance, and the regulatory ordinance also pretty closely mirrors the medical. There are some small changes regarding co-location and equivalent licenses, which account for the fact that certain medical facilities can at the same time house recreational facilities, and they co-locate in the same building with the same owner. The state of Michigan considers certain license types to be equivalent, and they treat them as such. And so our ordinance here places those equivalent facility types, and many of them have even the same name as medical does, but you recall there's 5 types of marijuana facilities, and in the recreational world they're called establishments, but they're same function, just different. One's medical and one's recreational. The only difference in terminology, if you hear it, is provisioning centers are equivalent to retailers, provisioning centers being the medical term and retailers being the recreational term. But aside from that, it would basically allow, it would mirror the medical ordinance in both location, and we wanted to have some consistency with applications, so that, staff wouldn't have to see 2 totally different kinds of applications. They kind of mirror each other in that way. So that was one of the things we talked about during Code Review Task Force and during Planning Commission, that there wanted to be some consistency in treatment. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Hang tight, Tom, and my apologies. Sure. Mr. Delorco, as the liaison to the Code Review Task Force, I'll also entertain any comments from you before we open up for questions and discussion. So let me first begin with Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh. Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh, as the rep to the Planning Commission, anything you'd like to add at this time?
No, besides what Mr. Forshee clarified, that was the one change about the co-location issues that were brought up as a concern. So unanimous approval by the Planning Commission. There was no negative vote against it.
Very good. And Councilmember Delorco, anything you'd like to add from a code review perspective?
Yeah, just briefly. Mr. Forshee summarized it very well. We basically mirrored what we did with the medical for both the zoning and the regulatory ordinances, taking into account that had gone through several drafts, and there were a lot of concerns brought up on council once we got it here. So we wanted to try to avoid too much back and forth so we could move this along as quickly as possible. So if there's any issues at this time, it's coming to council with unanimous support of both the Code Review Committee and the Planning Commission. So happy to entertain any questions as well.
Excellent, thank you, gentlemen. We'll open up for questions, either for legal counsel, or of course you may direct those to our Planning Commission rep or Councilmember Delorco, who serves on the Code Review Committee. Questions from the dais. Let's start with Councilmember Kraus, and then I'll transition to Councilmember Dillon.
I have a question rather than a statement, but with the unanimous from the Planning Commission and Code Review, I will support this, as well as the Saline voters who did pass this in 2018, so.
Very good, thank you for that. Councilmember Dillon, questions?
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, in the, let's see, I guess it would be under legislative intent, number 1, it talks about cultivation. Is that a general, or is that to us? Do we allow cultivation?
We do not.
Okay. So, because I just want to clarify that. I don't know, do you have it in front of you, Mr. Forshee, to what I'm talking about? So
I
it's
do
under
have it in front of me. I'm just-
2291 legislative intent subsection 1.
I see. Yeah, we can strike that word. I think it meant, we're trying to provide for a means of regulating it. And if the means of regulating that is to prohibit it, like you do with growers, but we could certainly strike that word.
Yeah, unless there's objection from the dais, I say we strike it. Okay, it can be struck, Tom.
Sure.
Thank you. And then as far as zoning is, so this still follows, we do location zoning, correct? That's our means. And is it 250 feet? Do you recall? I don't remember what that was. Is it the same as
So
medical?
it's 250 feet from business to business, 1,000 feet from school property.
Okay, so the 250, is that door to door, property line to
Yes.
property line?
It's door to door,
Door to
building
door.
to building.
Okay. So theoretically, you could have two, like, in one complex?
Depending on
Yeah.
where they locate on it on the parcel.
Theoretically, yes.
Okay. I just, and then, Mr. Forshee, can you just help me better understand about when we have medical, if somebody were to have a medical, they still have to apply for a recreation license. Now, it's not, they're not getting preempted, right into that, correct? They still have to go through the whole process. And just for clarification, do they have to do anything? Because I know it's not like a first in, first out. So like, what is the protocol for choosing those people that are getting the licenses?
Okay, so a couple of questions there. The last first, which is we intentionally avoided, like we did with the medical, and it's faring to be a good call because this is where a lot of the litigation has happened, which is we don't have a hard cap, if you recall. So we don't say you can only have X number, because if you do that, then you also have to have a competitive process where the city council or someone else is making the decision about who gets it. And there has to be a scoring rubric and other things like that. And that has led to a lot of litigation around the state. In fact, almost solely that's what the litigation has surrounded, besides election things. But so we use like what we were kind of terming like the natural selection method, where just like the medical, same thing, where zoning and the buffers control the number, but it's just by virtue of there being only so much space in the city and it only being allowed in certain zones with certain buffers. So it's not a hard cap, and we don't do a competitive process.
Okay, so, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. And then the first question was, was that about like how medical and recreational kind of play? So there's already a buffer between recreational and medical. So the people that are in there for medical right now, if they go through the special land use process, they could add recreational because that is an equivalent license and they can co-locate in the same building, in the same space. But they still do have to go through the special land use provisions of the ordinance. And they would have to also get a recreational license. Now, a lot of the license information is going to look very similar, just for practical purposes. So, you know, it's not really too much more legwork to put together a recreational application where they're already existing as a medical facility. But if for some reason co-location at a particular site doesn't make sense based on land use considerations, then that would be taken into account at a special land use hearing with the Planning Commission.
Okay. I guess my concern is that, you know, medical is sort of phasing out now that adult use is on board. And so I had hoped that at some point the city could either sunset or revoke our medical because we weren't really utilizing that and recreation would come on board. So do businesses, once they have that license, that medical, is there any point at which we could revoke it? If we were to kind of claw back, where they just kept the recreation? Is there any need to do that?
I think there's probably not much need to do that because there would be a kind of natural tendency for that to happen. I agree with you. That's kind of where I think people see the industry heading, that it's just more going to, recreational is just kind of take over the medical. So I think that'll happen naturally. The other thing is because we give a zoning approval to medical, they'll have vested rights unless they abandon the use. So if they abandon the medical use, then they could lose that special land use. But until they do that, they can continue on with their use until abandoned. But to answer your question overall, I don't see much need. I think over time, the regulations at the state level will even start to coalesce into, you know, not being that much different. And I think, you know, someone transitioning from medical to recreational or doing both at one location, probably not going to be much impact to surrounding. And I think the economics of it will decide that.
Well, that's the piece that you know, at the end of the day, it comes down to the dollars. And, you know, we can recapture some of the adult use, you know, dollars, but not the medical. And so, I mean, obviously you want to skew it towards adult use in that regard. So I don't know what is in the best interest for the city financially long-term. Because if you have the option of going in and you can buy the same type of product, whether you use medical, then we're not capturing any from that. Versus if it's strictly an adult use product, then we're seeing that revenue source, at least, you know, at this time.
Sure. And, you know, like I said, I think because the medical, you know, the revenues that they get from a medical place tend to be much lower than what they can get for recreational, I think it will tend into that direction anyway. But I do have to note that the medical does have a special land use, so they do have a vested right to continue that use until they abandon it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Any additional questions, Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh, and then I'll jump to Mr. Seal.
Tom, can you clarify, you know, with this whole industry, we know there's going to be consolidation and transfers and all of that. How will that process work for us to make sure that as ownership gets changed, that it's done through the proper channels and making sure licensure switches and all that?
Sure. So there's kind of two pieces to that. One is that there's the zoning piece of that. And so zoning runs with the land, as you know well, Mr. Gearbaugh. So that portion of it, that use will be okay on that parcel. But the second part is where you're getting at is who holds the regulatory license. And the way we control for that is, so the regulatory license is a yearly license. And so we built into the ordinance that if there's any change in ownership, if there's any material change to the application, then they have to let the city know. And of course, each year, they'll have to, whoever's at that site will have to reapply, show that they have a valid state license. So having gone through all the background checks and all the various checks that they do at the state level, and then they'd have to prove that to us and prove that, the conditions are still the same and that they have either the same or better as far as what is required of them in the regulatory realm. And then, of course, if they're acting outside of their creating some kind of zoning issue, we can act to enforce that as well.
With
Whoever may be there.
Yeah. With a special use, though, can't we set a timeline on that? I always thought that you have the ability to do that. If we wanted to set a 1, 5, or 10-year review? You've done that in
No.
the past.
Yeah, we really strongly advise against that. I've heard of that, but the case law in Michigan is pretty clear that once a use is started, once substantial construction is done, is kind of the magic words, then those people enjoy vested rights in a special land use permit until they either abandon it or, if it becomes an enforcement issue and, basically we get a court to say this special land use is revoked because they've not abided by either the conditions or other portions of the zoning ordinance.
And so by abandonment, is that 1 year or more, or?
Abandonment is actually, you have to have an intent to abandon, both an actual abandonment and an intent to abandon. And it's a pretty high bar because you have to prove that the person actually wanted to abandon that use for some amount of time. And the analogy sort of is like you could have a store, for example, like a grocery store, and even if they shuttered for even years because of economic conditions or some other outside factor, but then wanted to restart, they could, because they never abandoned their use. So yeah, there's any kind of sunset that just automatically happens without an abandonment is a very risky proposition.
Thank you.
Mr. Seal.
I'm sorry, Mr. Fortier, I'm not that familiar. I haven't sat down with the two ordinances side by side, the medical and the adult use. A business can hold both in the same place, location, under our ordinance. They have to pay two separate licensing fees.
Correct.
Okay, that's my question. Thank you.
That's all you got, Mr. Seal? Yep. Easy enough. Councilmember Kamara-Sulek.
Yes, so with talking about the two different licenses, and it's my understanding that on the medical side, that there's a smaller tax, so it's slightly cheaper to people that are medical users. So I'm wondering how in the long term this will impact medical marijuana users. If that discount, if you will still be intact, and how does that impact our tax revenue? if at all?
Yeah, so I'm not as familiar with on the purchasing side of it, whether there actually is a discount for medical users or not. I suspect that maybe locational. As I've said before, it's looking into a crystal ball a little bit because we don't know exactly what's going to happen at the state level. But everything that I've seen and all the conferences I've gone to and all the interactions I've had with the person who runs the permitting for the state of Michigan, it all seems to be coming together, medical and recreational coalescing. And I just see that happening more and more as we go. As far as, tax revenue, yeah, it's more, recreational is more advantageous to the city. And my guess is that as recreational takes off, the prices will probably come down because of competition, and but I'm not sure. I mean, I can't guarantee any certain price to a medical person. Now they could again hold both licenses at the same time and serve medical patients and provide under that pricing scheme, and then do the recreational under a separate pricing scheme. So there's nothing stopping them from doing that. The question is, will it make sense to continue on? And that's just a question I don't know at this time, just because we don't really know where it's headed, but I suspect it's going to transition more and more towards recreational.
Okay, thank you. Well, considering that this has been passed by the Planning Commission and the code review, I will be supporting this.
Very good. Are there any additional questions? There appear to be none. Then we have a simple motion on the floor moved by Mayor Pro Tem Gearboss, seconded by Commander Sulak, to simply acknowledge receipt of the March 2nd, 2022 memo. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Now, noting the one minor change that we made, is there a motion now to adopt or not to adopt ordinance number 834, an ordinance to add adult use marijuana establishments to certain zoning districts and define the process for each?
Motion to adopt.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Commander Sulak. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Delorco. Is there any additional discussion on the motion? Mayor Pro Tem Gearboss.
I've thought hard and long on this because I've had a number of individuals come forward to me with their concerns about the potential associated with some of the myths and actual concerns of their own experiences with marijuana and so forth. I'm supporting this tonight because we've already faced one legal challenge, and the concern is that we will have no authority to do what we would like to do with this in order to control where it's placed in our city and so forth. Some of the challenges would have wiped out everything, so we would have never had any control to place a business that we would not necessarily want to have next to a residential area or in a residential area. I think we've worked hard on this. The code enforcement group has approached it. Our legal team has looked at it. It's an issue that I believe is just coming down the road. I wish the feds would get this over with and identify it, but it's treating it no differently than liquor or anything else. A number of those items cause medical concerns and issues, yet they're not banned at this point, and because the voters have pushed for this. And as a result, I'm going to be supporting it tonight.
Thank you. Councilmember Seal?
Just a comment, Your Honor. First of all, I agree with my colleagues that it appears that the majority of the voters are in favor of this. And I agree with Mr. Gearbaugh entirely that this ordinance, I think, shapes it the most acceptable way for our community and places it where we want it within our community. So for those reasons, I'm going to support this.
Thank you. I would just add, I think if you were to evaluate our approach on recreational adult use marijuana, and if you go further back and look at how we dealt with medical marijuana, I think these are examples of how this organization is very thoughtful and thorough, and that we take our time to deal with problems in a very holistic way. We think strategically, and we put the appropriate safeguards and regulations in place. So as was noted by both Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh, Councilmember Seo, and others, This has been reviewed and discussed by the Planning Commission. It was a unanimous vote. It was reviewed and discussed, I think, numerous times by the code review. It was a unanimous vote. Our legal team has worked hard on this, and now it's coming before City Council. So much like all legislative solutions, it's not perfect. When you involve the number of stakeholders that we're required to engage, you're never going to craft a perfect solution, but I think this is more than adequate. And, you know, to an earlier point that I just articulated, it does have the appropriate safeguards and regulations in place. So I will be voting in the affirmative in just a moment when I call for a vote on agenda item 2276 and then on the subsequent motion 2277. Councilmember Dillon.
Thank you. I do appreciate the efforts put in by all parties on this. We have had several discussions and dialogues, and we've had a little bit of give and take on a lot of issues. My one statement is that I would like to make sure that when it does come to special land use, that Planning Commission is very thoughtful in even though we have carved out areas, thinking forward, looking forward at future development and what those areas are going to look like, because this is not a business that's going to go in and at some point decide, okay, you know what, Saline's not the right market for us. If it's gonna, if this will travel as a special land use and stay with that property, another business will most likely come in. So once we make a dispensary, establishment, whatever you want to call it for whatever the type of business it is, we need to remember that it'll be there most likely forever. And so being thoughtful about that, I think, is going to be the next key element for us.
Very good, thank you. And actually, there's a medical marijuana application on this Wednesday's Planning Commission agenda. And while this recreational ordinance was not in place when the petitioner submitted their application, it is my understanding that they will be pursuing an adult use venture. So if members of the community or members of council would like to attend Wednesday's Planning Commission meeting, feel free. It's at 7 p.m. and it's agenda items 22-09 and 22-10. If there's nothing further on this item, I will call for a vote. It's been properly moved by Commander Sulak, seconded by Del Orco to adopt. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. The subsequent motion is agenda item 22-77, ordinance number 835, an ordinance to amend chapter 22, business of code of the city of Saline by amending article 5. This will be a motion to adopt or not to adopt proposed ordinance number 835, an ordinance to amend chapter 22, business of code of the city of Saline by amending article 5, adult use marijuana establishments.
Move to adopt.
Moved by Councilmember Del Orco to adopt. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Kamara Sulak. Mr. Forshee, any brief obligatory remarks on this? You touched on it earlier, but I'll give you another bite at the apple if you'd like it.
No, Mr. Mayor, just that it closely mirrors the medical in terms of where the uses, equivalent uses are allowed.
Okay, very good.
That's all.
Thank you. Questions for staff? Councilmember Dillon?
Just quickly, I know when we were in discussions with medical, we had maps. Was that just for our reference, or were they actually attached? So how do people know what the areas are?
So the maps will be kept by staff, and they'll have to be continuously updated because of the buffering. So once a particular use goes through the system, goes through the special land use, and eventually makes its way to getting a regulatory license, then basically a dot will be placed on that map with showing 250 feet around it, and then 1,000 feet schools, and that will just have to be continuously maintained. So it's kind of a living document that will be updated as applications are received and approved.
Mr. Forshee, I just have one other question, just a huge what if. So what if a school is built that happens to be near a marijuana establishment? What happens then?
Basically nothing. It's only at the time that the facility is built or establishment is built, and nothing would prevent a school from going in if it felt that was an appropriate location.
Okay. So there's no clawback or anything like that rescinding due to that? they have sort of their rights from,
They have their land use rights that continue on with the land and continue until abandoned, as we discussed. But yep,
thank you.
you're
Any
welcome.
additional questions from the dais? Any subsequent discussion on the motion? Then we have a motion moved by Del Orco, seconded by Kamara Sulak to adopt. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Tom, thank you very much. Appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council members.
Have a great night. Moving on to agenda item 22-78. This is Saline Area Fire Department, or Saline Area Fire Authority supplemental contribution. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the March 4th, 2022 memo from Recording Secretary Joyce and to approve or not to approve the supplemental contribution of $20,382 to the Saline Area Fire Department from the assigned legislative changes fund balance.
Motion to acknowledge and approve?
Motion by Kamara Sulak to acknowledge and to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Kraus. Well, very briefly, and then I'll turn it over to Councilmember Dillon if she would like to make a statement. But as I've discussed with many of you, COVID, a number of employee absences due to the pandemic and the increased fuel costs have, we're concerned, specifically the fire chief is concerned, that without an additional contribution, we will not end this fiscal year in the black. So we have discussed this issue twice now at the Saline Fire Board level, once at our regular meeting in February and once at a subsequent meeting in March. We developed a funding formula that mirrors the criteria that's used on an annual basis to calculate the contributions from the 4 participating entities, of which the city of Saline contributes the largest share. And so ours is $20,000. And we're fairly confident that with this additional contribution from the city of Saline, from York Charter Township, from Lodi Township, and from Saline Township, that the fire department will end this current fiscal year in the black. Councilmember Dillon, anything you'd like to add?
No, I just will, just to piggyback on that, the ask was 60,000, and so the city's portion would be 20, and it was unanimous by all parties, the 4 municipalities, to participate. So everybody is giving a piece to it to ensure that our fire does finish in the black this year. And we've learned and made some budget adjustments to go forward, and we'll be coming forth with some adjustments at a later point.
Well, and I think that's an excellent point, that the budget that has been proposed and approved for this subsequent fiscal year, I think does provide us the resources where, barring any unforeseen calamity, we would not be in this position again in 2023. So, Mr. Gearbaugh, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I was just wondering, we are contributing this funds back. Unfortunately, we were reimbursed for some costs. Was that not the case, or is that not the situation that the Saline Fire Board could have submitted its own expenses and gotten reimbursed?
Do you know the answer? Do you want to comment on that first?
I believe they would still be eligible to submit an application for any COVID-related expenses under the FEMA Public Assistance Grant because they are a public body.
Can we remind me tomorrow when I'm in the office? Let's follow up with Fire Chief Spurley about that.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure he's done one of those in the past. He certainly wouldn't have done it in his previous capacity. As fire marshal for Pittsfield Township, but let's look into that.
That is one of my, along with that is one of my concerns about administrative approaches that the fire board does and how they look at things and such of this nature. So I'm just sharing that concern with the 2 representatives right now, that I think going forward with a lot of asks and a lot of costs and these things being done, that there needs to be a formal or more appropriate review in terms of how they're administered.
Well, and as you and I have talked, Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh, and of course I've had numerous conversations with Councilmember Dillon to this effect. I think it is, I think we're probably overdue as a Saline Area Fire Department to have an independent third party come in and do a holistic review of our agency. Not only look at the funding structure, but the governance model, the operations, and the policies. I think that's a best practice. That's something that we've done here on numerous occasions with Saline Parks and Rec, with our former Building and Engineering Department. We had Ann Arbor Spark do an analysis to help us with economic development back in 2012. I think the fire department would benefit from that. It's never been done in the history of the department. And like I said, I think it's overdue, and I think an analysis like that would pay for itself and prove beneficial in innumerable ways. So that is something that I'm spearheading. I think the fire board will discuss it at our next meeting, and hopefully take action later this summer.
Thank you.
Anything else? Easy enough. Is there any subsequent discussion on the motion? Then we have a motion on the floor moved by Kamara Sulak, seconded by Kraus, to acknowledge and to approve. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 22-79. This is a special assessment resolution for the Saline Area Fire Department. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the March 15th, 2022 memo from City Manager O'Toole and to adopt or not to adopt resolution number 22-79, Fire Protection Special Assessment District.
Move to acknowledge receipt.
It's been simply moved by Mayor Pro Tem Gearbout to acknowledge receipt. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Dillon. City Manager O'Toole, would you like to begin?
Certainly. As previously discussed, the fire department is expecting a significant increase to its FY23 budget, approximately a 35% increase overall. In looking at the expenditure requirements for our own general fund, the operation of police, public works, and general administration, we do not believe that it is fiscally prudent at this time to incur that full cost on general fund dollars, and are recommending that council consider a millage of 0.7. As you recall, voters approved up to 1 mil could be levied annually. In this case, we would recommend levying 0.7 mils, stop-gapping the remaining portion with a one-time contribution from the assigned legislative changes line item, and then the remaining portion coming from the general fund.
Very good. And just to confirm a point that was expressed and articulated at our last meeting, the recommendation from your office and staff currently is 0.7. That is subject to change during the budget process.
No, that is not subject to change. With this resolution, we adopt a specific amount.
I see. Okay. Very good. Mr. Gearbout, would you like to begin?
That's what I wanted to clarify. I was hoping that the city manager would explain that. The one question I have is we've got 0.7 this year, then we anticipate raising it to the full 1 mil next year as a result of some of these legislative changes and things not being available?
It's entirely dependent on what the fire authority does at this point, what increases, if any, there are to their budget, in addition to what we've experienced this year, and whether they elect to pursue a separate millage.
I knew there were rumors of that, but I didn't know if that was going to wait until, hopefully, an administrative review is done. The only other thing I would say on this is that, unfortunately, we are having the realization of having to raise additional revenue, just like any other organization, and this was approved decades ago. It was never put in place, and it will be an increase on taxes. I think people need to understand that's going to happen, but it's for the right thing. Fire protection is a necessity in our town, as is first responders, so I have no problem approving it at a 0.7 for this year.
Mr. Swets, I'm sorry. I should have acknowledged you earlier. Our bond counsel will make a few comments.
Yeah, I did want to just add a few words of clarification for things that we lawyers worry about and the rest of the normal world doesn't. But technically, this is not a millage. Technically, this is a special assessment. It's an unusual assessment because it's assessed in the form of it's expressed in the form of a millage. So in all practical purposes, that's the way it's going to operate. But there are some technical differences. It's not subject to Headley rollback. It is subject to residents having the right to appeal it if they wanted to go through that process. And because it's an assessment, this is a three-step process. So tonight you're taking the first step and you're making the important decision to assess an amount that would be an equivalent of a 0.7 mil levy on the tax roll. Then this resolution directs the mayor to make a special assessment roll, which is just the way the statute requires us to be. That'll, in particular, the treasurer will just take the 0.7 and create a spreadsheet that shows what that cost would be to each individual property taxpayer. And so that'll come back to your next meeting. And then at that meeting, if the council decides to go forward, you would schedule a public hearing for the second meeting in April, or we could let that slide if there were reasons to do so, but I would assume it'll be at the second meeting in April. And at that point, the public does have a chance to come in and make comment on, one, the amount of the approved budgets. So we're saying tonight they're tentatively approved because we need to let the public comment on them, and then they'll be finally approved in the third resolution on the 18th. They can also talk about whether they think their particular individual assessment is proper and so forth. So there will be that step. And then finally, after the close of that public hearing, there'll be a resolution that you'll consider on the 18th that then would finally confirm this role. And at that point, then it's said and done. So there's a little bit of process left.
Okay, so I apologize, Mr. Swets, if I'm being obtuse, but, so the .7 is subject to change then between now and the 18th?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah.
Just want to be clear on that.
You know, if you were to change it after the public hearing on the 18th, if you were to raise it at that point, we'd need to have a new public hearing. But yes, it is totally in the council's hand until that resolution's adopted on the 18th.
Okay, so they'll get, the legislative body has 2 more bites at the apple. One set our meeting on April the 4th, and then the subsequent one on the 18th.
Right.
Very good. Why don't you hang tight, Roger, in the event that there are questions that are best addressed by, for you. Additional questions for either the city manager or legal counsel? Councilmember Dillon?
Thank you. So I just want to start with talking about this special assessment. All 4 municipalities have this special assessment. It is my understanding right now that the city of Saline is the only one that is not currently utilizing it. So I don't want people to think that this is a penalty or a tax for just city residents. This goes across the board to all the municipalities, and it's just how they've chosen to pay. In the past, the city has chosen to use general fund dollars to fund our portion. And so we are looking to offset that now with this special assessment. I do have a question for the city manager, which is about some of the funding source you're looking for is the assigned legislative changes dollars. So those are some of our like ARPA type monies?
No,
Or
if you recall, the assigned legislative changes is that extra, that funding that we've been banking when personal property rules change.
Okay.
It's fairly unrestricted in terms of how we can apply it, and certainly this is a notable change that we could justify using those funds from.
So that's wonderful. My concern is, do we have concerns moving forward that this is sort of a one-and-done funding source? So then the following year, are we going to look at using, you know, $250,000 out of general fund dollars? And so, like, are we able to plan that out long-term?
The portion that is assigned to legislative changes right now is the portion that represents what we would otherwise be able to fully capture from the special assessment rate. So in terms of millage, the recommendation is 0.7 as a minimum, and the assigned legislative changes makes up 0.3 mils. So if we use this as a one-time source in the future, we would need to consider, if that is the only option available to us because another millage or some other format doesn't exist, levying the full amount.
Okay. I understand that. So I just know that once we sort of start on that track, it's going to be hard to roll back off of that special assessment and try to recapture those dollars out of general fund. So I am just saying that once we put that assessment out there, the likelihood that it stays in relative perpetuity is pretty good. Would you agree to that?
Yes, I would agree with that. I do not see how we could fund current services of the city of Saline with that kind of hit to our general fund.
Okay.
I think that's true, but I do want to be clear that the trajectory we're on at the fire department in terms of funding, at least in my judgment, is not sustainable. Hence, one of the reasons for an independent review is that something has to change. And I think the likelihood, in all likelihood, it's probably a combination of a fire department millage and some rather, I guess this is debatable, but a more nominal contribution from the 4 participating entities.
Absolutely. I think Councilmember Dillon and Mayor Marl, as representatives on the fire board, you're acutely aware of the fact that right now we are very much in a holding pattern to see what the future of the Saline Area Fire Authority looks like. So until we have a better idea of that, it's difficult to say long-term what sort of special assessment we'll be levying. For this year, this is what we recommend will work for our general fund budget without having to sacrifice the existing services that we offer.
Yeah, I think the chief has been very articulate that the funding for this, the next 12 months, we should sort of think about as a stopgap. I'm not sure it's going to set the tone for the future. It just helps us make some basic needs and sort of change the trajectory of the department, if that makes sense. Mr. Mayor Sulek.
Yes, thank you. How soon are we having this study done?
Well, it hasn't been approved yet.
All right.
So,
Assuming it gets approved, how quickly does something like that get started? Because obviously it sounds like we really need it and to get a better handle on that 35% increase.
yeah, so I reviewed a very thorough report that was done by an outfit out of the Pacific Northwest, who did a very comparable analysis for the Scioto Township Fire Department in either 2018 or 2019. It's excellent work. It's actually copies in my office if you'd like to take a look at it. I think from the moment that entity was hired to completion was probably 3 to 4 months, and I would expect a similar scope here in Saline.
Okay, all right. I think this is a very important decision, and I'm very cautious with adding any millage to our taxpayers. But these services are necessary and basic to the community, and something that we pride ourselves on having. Excellent fire protection and a police force. So I really look forward to seeing that study, and I might drop by your office and look at a copy.
Please.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Any additional discussion? There's simply a motion to acknowledge receipt at this point. There appears to be nothing else, so we'll proceed to vote. Thank you again, Mr. Swets. It's been properly moved by Gearboss, seconded by Dillon to acknowledge receipt. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. How about a motion now to adopt or not to adopt resolution number 22-79?
So moved.
Moved by Kraus, seconded by Gearboss to adopt. Is there any additional discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 22-80, Curtis Park Play Structure. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the March 15, 2022 memo from Parks and Rec Director Scruggs, and to approve or not to approve the purchase and installation of the Curtis Park Play Structure at a cost not to exceed $39,700.
Move to acknowledge and approve.
Moved by CO to acknowledge and approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commander Sulak. Director Scruggs, the floor is yours.
I think the memo I put together kind of explains the whole project. This play structure is very old. This was actually a donation from the Reddy's Foundation back in 1999. Over the past year, like through the pandemic, we started to see a lot of deterioration of that plastic coating over the metal parts, and because of the age of the structure, it doesn't have any replacement parts or anything like that. So we got a bid from our local, or our play equipment company that we deal with quite frequently. They're part of Sourcewell, which is already vetted vendor for all of Michigan. We're part of Sourcewell. And so this is a not-to-exceed number. I worked with Park Foreman Benedict, and we reviewed all of the bids together, looked at what the pricing was. We're asking for the full amount, not to do any in-kind service, just because it would actually cost us more to do the in-kind, like removal of the equipment, the installation of the safety surface, things like that. So they can do it at a much better cost than what we could. And I did not put on this, as I was reading my memo over again, I did not put on there that this is through TIFA funds. So this was already part of the TIFA budget that we had proposed. Actually, it's coming in a little bit less than what of the money that we anticipated.
Director Scruggs, very quickly, I know the answer to this, but I want you to state it for the record, because I think the public will appreciate it. The existing structure, which dates from back to 1999, in your professional judgment, did we get the appropriate amount of life out of that structure?
Yes.
20 plus years?
Yes.
Par for the course?
Yeah.
Very good. And was this matter discussed at a Parks Commission meeting?
Yes, that they knew that this was part of what we were bidding on, and this has kind of been on the books, and we finally got all the bids together and whatnot, so.
Okay, I'm not sure if it was discussed in 2021 when Councilmember Dillon would have still been the liaison, or 2022 when Councilmember Seal would have been the representative. Councilmember Dillon, Mr. Seal, any additional comments?
No, I know that we had discussed it, we had talked about it. Remind me, this is for small children, correct? Or did you end up getting a bigger one?
This is the 5 to 12-year-old
Okay, yeah, so
structure.
it's-
The other one on the other side of the pavilion is for the little guys, like the 2, 3, 4-year-olds. And that one is in still good condition.
Okay.
Questions for Director Scruggs? Councilmember Dillon.
Thank you. I just want to make one statement. I'm glad that we're doing this, but I would, as we start moving forward with replacing equipment, start looking at more all-inclusive play structures, and I'd really like to see an all-inclusive play area in Saline at some point. I know we have created a nice path at the Brecken Park structure so that people are able to traverse to get to it, but a truly all-inclusive play structure is something that, I've always had a dream of, that I think our community would welcome and truly does need. So hopefully that's something we can look at in the future.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I know that I just had a meeting with Rex Clary from the schools, and they're getting ready to put ADA, an all-inclusive, it's called Universal Play Structure, at Pleasant Ridge, and that's, the cost is over $100,000 for those pieces of equipment. So it is something that we would need to budget for, maybe try to get some good donors for it, yeah. But that would be needed in our parks.
Thank you, Councilmember Dillon. Any additional questions for Director Scruggs? Mr. Kamir Sulek?
Is it going to be put in this existing location?
Yes.
Is there any room to move it closer to the parking so it's easier accessible?
No, actually, this is an ideal location just because of the flooding issues that we have at Curtis. This is a really nice high spot where the flooding of the park, it doesn't get affected. So it's a good location.
So if we, in the future, that would make it difficult to provide a pathway to it for easier accessibility?
There is a pathway that runs, we would need to put a stub to it. So the pathway comes across the bridge towards the pavilion. We could do like a stub off to that play structure.
Okay, good. I'm just looking towards the future and better accessibility. Thank you.
Any additional questions for Director Scruggs? Carla, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Any subsequent discussion on the motion? We have a motion on the floor then moved by Seal, seconded by Kamir Sulek to acknowledge and to approve. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. And last up is agenda item 22-82, Pleasant Ridge Design Contract Amendment. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the March 17, 2022 memo from City Engineer Humphreys and to approve or not to approve the contract amendment from Fleece Vanderbrink for additional design, engineering, and bidding services for Pleasant Ridge and South Harris storm relief in a not to exceed amount of $12,472.50.
Move to acknowledge receipt.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh just to acknowledge receipt. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilmember Dillon. I'll get you on the next one, Mr. Kamir Sulek. Engineer Humphreys, the floor is yours.
Okay, so in follow-up to my memo that is in the packet, I printed out a larger copy of the map that was included in the 2019 Asset Management Report for Storm. And it's outlined in this map, the existing storm sewer located south of Hillcrest along Harris that ultimately discharges along Pleasant Ridge to Peoples Park. Over here is where the ultimate outlet for the storm sewer is. This line was identified as a Category 5 that we talked a little bit about, which is the condition of the worst assessment of pipe. This pipe, I've seen the video of it. It has, it's a 27-inch pipe that is no longer round. It's collapsed. In the video, you can tell that it's elliptical shaped, and it's every single joint that you go by has very large gaps in the joint. So it was identified to be rerouted, not only because of its condition and because of its actual route. It goes existing. It kind of goes cross-country to get over to Ann Arbor Street. So this was identified back in 2019. It was my understanding this project was to be added to the streets project that were done, the Lawson Hillcrest that was done in that area last year. And due to, so Fleece and Vandenbrink was authorized in March of 2021 to do the design for this. They were only authorized for $13,000, a very small percentage of the overall contract value or estimated cost, which is very low for engineering. That was added on. They started the design, but it never really went last year. So we re-picked it up this winter when we were prioritizing all of our capital jobs. And so Fleece and Vandenbrink got the project finished, designed, bid out to bid, and it's currently out to bid. We're accepting bids tomorrow for this project. All of our other open design engineering projects are between 8 and 15% of, and that's typically what you see. You see a little bit higher engineering on the smaller projects, a little bit lower engineering percentage on the larger projects. So there's no doubt in my mind the additional fees that have been asked for Fleece and Van are justified and were spent on this project. And basically, it was to finish design and get the bidding documents out to bid. So that's why I'm here tonight, is asking for that formal approval of Fleece and Vanderbrink's.
Easy enough. Questions for our city engineer, Mr. Gearbaugh?
Can
Yes.
you clarify, hoping that this won't involve any tearing up of Lawson or Pleasant Ridge in order to do this? I mean, what is going to be?
So it's directly, and actually that's one of my concerns with this project, yes, is that it's directly adjacent and south. So we're not tearing up any of the new streets, but we will be tearing up. It goes from Pleasant Ridge and Hillcrest south to, Harris and Hillcrest south to Pleasant Ridge, and then Pleasant Ridge to the west over to Ann Arbor Street is the new route of the pipe, which is actually shown pretty nicely on this map. So the last year's projects were here and here,
Right.
and we're picking up here and going down. So it's the same area as far as detours, same people, same school, which is one of the reasons why the contract documents currently have a schedule from June through September. So get out there in June. We're trying to get this job done before school starts, but no matter what, detours and everything will be in place before school starts. So it's in the absolutely same area, but it's under a part of the street that has not been repaved yet. So that part, we're not tearing up a new street. We're just continuing directly adjacent to the south.
So will we be repaving Pleasant Ridge where it's still up?
Yes, yep, Pleasant Ridge, and and it becomes ultimately almost a lane of Pleasant Ridge. You know, there's a boulevard there as it goes, and so we're going to be in the north side. That's where we come out to Ann Arbor Street, and then north up to Harris to Hillcrest. That I don't know how many 100 feet that little section on Harris is also.
Okay. The reason why I acknowledge is I was kind of surprised. I was thinking this project was part of the last year's project and didn't understand why we would be paying for it twice. So it sounds like we didn't do any of the engineering at all for this project.
It was authorized last year, I think somewhat started, but the engineering really got done this winter and finalized off of that original design. And last year's project, they did sanitary, water main and road, and got ready for this. So I will say the positive of this is like at the intersection here, like there was a little bit of sanitary lead and storm that had to be fixed. So they got ready for this, so we don't have to go back onto Hillcrest. So that little bit was a forethought, or was thought through. But the project, I can't tell you why it didn't go, but it didn't go.
Is there any water line being replaced?
There's actually a small just water relocation that has to occur, but no, we don't have any water. We just have to relocate it because this storm we're putting in, we're going from a 27 and we're upsizing it to a 42-inch. So we're putting in rather large concrete and we're putting in 7-foot structures. I mean, so you think of the road only being 20, whatever. I mean, we're taking up half width of the road just for our structure almost. So I bring that up just because the water main's in our way in one location. And same as also with the gas. The gas has to be relocated in one location simply due to just a conflict with our humongous pipe we're putting in.
I was just clarifying to make sure that we're doing all those utilities,
yeah.
especially if we're putting in a new water line,
Yes.
considering all the other things.
No, good point. And the water line along here, we did verify is newer. So that's why the water main is not being replaced. But it was replaced on Hillcrest this last summer.
And
Yes.
so you've been working with them, so it's all your full oversight with police in terms of this project, so you're
Yes.
satisfied with what they've given is,
Yes.
from your perspective, is appropriate?
Yes, from my perspective, this is a high priority project because of the condition of the existing pipe across backyards.
Okay, thank you.
Very thorough. Thank you. Any additional questions? Councilmember Dillon.
Thank you. So just for clarification, we're abandoning some lines, correct? We're not doing removal, we're just abandoning? And is it just that zigzag black line?
It is. It's that very light line in black. That's exactly it, yes.
Okay. Is there any chance that could collapse? If you're saying that the pipe is already collapsed, I mean, are we going to get sinkholes or something on private property that?
That would be our concern if we left it as is. So abandoning it, we will fill it with grout, and so we will not leave a void in the ground, is what I'm saying. So the idea is to abandon it in place, but fill the pipe with grout, so you're not leaving a void below the surface.
Okay, so then we will have to enter private property, and there would be some impact to residents that are.
It's all within the easement technically,
Oh,
so
it
as
is
far as,
still-
so all
okay.
of this is technically, well, I should say, I haven't verified that, but I'm assuming that this is all within a utility easement, all of the backyards, but that's less disruptive than, like, we're not planning to dig up in people's backyards or anything, like, there'll be some equipment and, yeah, I'm actually looking at how we'll be able to come from the street this way. It's going to be just this one structure, which we've been in contact with the property owner. They're definitely well aware of the pipes there and are willing to work with us. I know that much. With Lisa, yeah, the one property owner where it goes kind of kitty corner between the two houses.
Fantastic. And I'm sorry, what did you say was the time frame for this project?
Right now, the bid documents have it, right now, bid opening tomorrow and starting June. We have to June, and we have a 3-month construction timeframe for this. And quite frankly, yeah, I'm getting a little worried about price, so we're gonna see how it comes in. I mean, that's just where we're at right now with
Right.
everything. And, yeah, that's,
Well, I appreciate you making this a priority, because it definitely looks like it needs to be.
thanks.
So thank you.
Any additional questions for the city engineer? Mr. Gearbaugh?
Just wonder, kind of a side issue, the East Look drain, considering this is a small project, there was one that we voted to be assessed and everything. Do we have any timeline on when that one's going to?
Yeah, my boots are all dirty from being out there today, actually. Yeah, actually, we're gonna be out there tomorrow morning digging a hole next to Eastlick. DPW, yep. We're starting that one tomorrow.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Any subsequent discussion on the motion? Then we have a motion on the floor, actually just moved by, it's been moved by Gearbaugh, seconded by Dillon, to simply acknowledge receipt. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. And how about a motion now to approve?
Move to approve.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Kamara Sulak. Any subsequent discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. Motion carries unanimously. Tesha, thank you very much. Have a good evening. Appreciate your work on this. Let's go through a quick round of commission, committee, and task force reports. I'll start with Del Orco, end with Kraus.
Briefly, the Environmental Commission met in its form as a subcommittee to finalize language and details around the business grant proposal to incentivize recyclable materials in local businesses. And we have a scheduled release date to coincide with Earth Day, which is April 22nd. So more information will be coming along that line shortly.
Very good. Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh.
Just an FYI, as you mentioned earlier, we will be considering a medical marijuana facility provisioning center on Michigan Avenue, the west side, at Planning Commission this week.
Very good. Councilmember Dillon.
Yes, not sure that we've had a meeting since our last meeting. HDC continued to work through a construction request on North Ann Arbor Street, and unfortunately, we were not able to reach consensus for it, so that matter is going to continue forward.
Very good. Mr. Seal?
Nothing, Your Honor?
Councilmember Kamara Sulak?
Yes, for the Saline Youth Council, we have the Saline Youth of the Year coming up. We have applications in, and that award will be made as every year in April. And then the DEI committee, the most notable item is that Saline Area Schools is talking about hiring a full-time diversity, equity, and inclusion staff member. But more news will be following that. And that wraps it up.
Very good. Councilmember Kraus?
Thanks. Just a quick update on arts and culture. We started a list of matchmaking for pop-up live musicians and vendors or businesses. So we'll continue to match those until we have matches, and then we'll release dates.
Very good. Let's transition to reports and other announcements. Councilmember Del Orco. Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh. I've got two. First, the Saline Teen Center is reintroducing their annual chili cook-off fundraiser. And I have agreed to participate, but I think the venture would be more successful if instead of the mayor participating, it was city council. So it is scheduled for April the 23rd. The time is different, however. It was usually a luncheon, and it's scheduled from 3 to 5. I will be donating the chili. I'd love to have some of my council colleagues there to help drum up some support and dollars, also to promote the event. And I'm looking for some folks to donate some condiments, so crackers, cheese, sour cream, scallions, et cetera. And I unfortunately will not be able to be there the whole time because I've got to be at a dinner that evening in Sinbad's in Detroit. So I'd probably be there for about the first hour or so. But if you're interested in helping me, email me, text me, call me sometime this week because I'd like to do a media blast or a post about this. But I did commit to Sunshine Lambert, who's my contact, that I will participate. So again, if you're interested in helping, that would be greatly appreciated. My other announcement is the Rec Center Sustainability Task Force and the Historic Properties Working Group, as compelled by City Council, are required to submit their final reports and recommendations to the City Clerk's office no later than the end of this month. And so we need to find a time to have those committees present their recommendations and to have a discussion. I chatted with the city manager briefly about this. One option would be to prolong our budget workshop meeting on April the 11th. My understanding, City Manager O'Toole, is if we were to meet on the 11th and just deal with the budget, it would probably be about a 3 to 4 hour meeting.
Correct.
Okay, so if we added the Rec Center Sustainability Task Force report and the Historic Properties report, I would suspect we'd be adding another 2 hours, probably about an hour per each report, would be my guess. Maybe give or take a little bit. Or we can find an alternative date. I know this is a difficult time because of the budget cycle, but I would like to have these two groups present while the reports are still fresh, timely, relevant. So what's your pleasure? Let me start to my left with Councilmember Delorco.
I guess I'd prefer an alternative date because that pushes me well beyond my attention span.
Okay, fair enough. Appreciate the honesty. Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh?
Yeah, but I mean, we do it a separate Monday.
Okay. Councilmember Dillon?
Yeah, I'll kind of go with the flow on it. You know, I sort of, on Mondays, I just sort of earmark for council, so maybe on an off Monday.
Okay. Mr. CO?
The 11th would work for me.
The 11th of April would work for you, okay. Mr. Kamir Sulak?
Alternate date.
Okay.
It's husband's birthday, alternative date.
Your husband's birthday on the 11th?
Yep.
Okay, well, God bless you for coming to a budget workshop meeting, well, but you'll be out of there by 6, 7. Why don't we shoot then, what does the 25th look like then for people? That would be the last Monday of the month, which means we'd have a meeting every Monday in April. Or we could find an alternative date if there's a date during the week that works well for folks.
Well, the 25th is my birthday, so if you make me come to a meeting, I expect gifts.
Okay, fair enough.
Can we add that to the budget?
Someone needs to bring cupcakes.
Discussion?
Mr. Delorco?
I'm fine with the 25th.
Let me ask this question first. Let me start with Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh. Do you think that you could get your, some members of the Historic Properties Working Group to attend on the 25th of April?
I'll have to check.
Okay. And Director Scruggs, it had been our intent to have you and I kind of frame the issue and the analysis, but then have Mr. Heineck, Paul Heineck, and Greg Hornberger take the lead on the presentation. So it is subject to their availability. But I think if we're giving them a month's time, there's a strong likelihood that they would be able to commit. So the 25th works for you, Mr. Delorco?
Yes.
Mr. Gearbaugh? Okay. Councilmember Dillon?
Yes.
Mr. CO?
Yes.
Mr. Kamir Sulak?
I think so. I don't have access to the master calendar.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, let's tentatively put the 25th down. Mr. Gearbaugh, if you could reach out to your team and see if they're available. And then Director Scruggs, can I empower you sometime between now and the close of business tomorrow to reach out to Greg and Paul and see if they're available on the 25th?
We actually meet tomorrow night, so I'll be able to get back.
Okay, perfect.
7 p.m.?
Well, I'd like to do earlier.
Yeah, we could do earlier.
6, yeah, 6 work. So we could be out of here by 8 o'clock? Be the goal, 8:30? Okay, all right. Well, Clerk Corral, if you could pencil that in for 6 o'clock on February 25th. Okay? April, excuse me. I'm all messed up on my dates. Sorry. Okay? That's it for me in terms of announcements. Councilmember Dillon?
You know, I just wanted to make mention, Ms. Kraus mentioned it earlier, that I had an opportunity to attend the Michigan Municipal League Capital Conference. It was a 2-day conference in Lansing, and there was a lot of great information coming out of there. There's going to be a lot of appropriations, and really it's a matter of kind of running to the table with what you've got, hoping to get some of that money. It's going to be a big money grab. So I'm optimistic for us. I also had an opportunity to attend a 3-hour zoning board of appeals class, that same time frame. And I just wanted to, the reason I bring this up is that I really want to thank the city for earmarking dollars to provide these kind of learning opportunities for us. I think it's very important that we take advantage of these. I know it's a great benefit to me, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Seo, any reports or announcements?
None, Your Honor.
Councilmember Kamir Sulak?
Nothing further.
Councilmember Kraus?
Nothing further.
Easy enough. Then let's transition to our last agenda item, which is a brief overview of the risk mitigation spreadsheet that was disseminated as part of your packet. I will state again for the public record, this is not subject to public disclosure. This information needs to remain confidential. However, you can keep the spreadsheet for your files. We are not going to be engaging in discussion or Q&A this evening for obvious reasons. If you do have subsequent questions or concerns after the city manager's remarks, please direct those to her office. And please note that some of the areas that are highlighted in red, I think in particular, in which we do not have a substantive update on, would really fall under the purview of the community development director. And so it will be a priority for me and for staff to make sure that when we have an individual in that position, that they're working aggressively to deal with these issues and provide an update to city council. So city manager, before I turn it over to Clerk Royal, anything you'd like to add?
No.
Okay, so the city clerk actually took the lead on this. Terry, this turned out, this is excellent, actually, very helpful, at least from my perspective. If you want to provide a few brief obligatory remarks, that would be great.
I want to thank Lori Champion because she's been helping me with this, so she's taken me through the steps by step. On this sheet, I just want to let you know, red means that no progress has been made. Green means that we're working on it, but it is not complete. Blue means it has been completed. If we do not hear from you within the next week or so, we will take the blue off and put it onto a completed spreadsheet. We will keep them, but it will be on a completed spreadsheet, and then a new item from the risk mitigation meetings that we had will be brought in and put into this so that we will continue to process all of them until they're completed.
And if I'm not mistaken, what is enumerated and provided this evening were sort of the top priorities. So the
Correct.
things that fall off that were on blue will be replaced by issues that are important, but they were secondary to what was enumerated in the spreadsheet.
Correct, and as we go through, hopefully we will get through them all, and then I will bring this back in another 3 months, and you will see where we've progressed from before to now.
Very good. Thank you, Terry. Again, if you have questions, please direct those to the city manager or to Clerk Royal. We come now to the second public comment period. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question to city council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. God bless you for hanging tight.
Well, it was a pleasure. My name is Kent Borland. About 20 years ago, I had a serious heart operation, and I started to do things which were a little more healthy than in times past. And one of the things I did was to start to go to your rec center. And I've been going there for approximately 150 days a year for about 15 years. And during that period of time, I began to notice things more things became noticeable to me, and they began to, I think, reveal things about the people who manage and work the rec center, and I thought those things should be brought to your attention. And over the years, over 20 years, the number of things that I've noticed that reveal things to me about the people who are managing and running the rec center, it was a cumulative process. First thing I noticed was that the place is clean and well organized and very harmonious. And I took note of the fact that whoever painted the place did it correctly. There's no fuzziness around. The place is clean and it's well managed. And among the management that I noticed, that I thought I would bring to your attention, is the fact that the communication with people who come into that building is very well considered and thought out. I noticed over the years, and I didn't notice this right away, this is maybe just in the last few years, I noticed that when you're in the building, you never encounter someone face to face in a hallway. The hallways are one way. Well, now, why would that be? Because of the virus. Because we are better, we are healthier if we're not passing someone this way. And so I'm sitting here to myself saying, you know, someone really thought that out. And the communication directs everyone into a one-way transit system on 2 floors. Very well thought out. I started to then understand that the people are thoughtful. Everything at the rec center has been well thought out and planned. When you walk into there, you see wonderful art. The colors are harmonious. Everything, you never see fast movement. You never hear loud sounds. It's a quiet and peaceful place. And it's not only the physical characteristic of the place that's remarkable, but the people. You come into that place and you will always be dealing with a relaxed, well-informed, kind, decent, friendly person. And because they're relaxed, I felt some responsibility to come out here and present this information to you because you're doing a good job through the people who run the rec center, and I thank you.
That's very nice of you. Thank you, Kent. Yeah, very nice. Very nice. We do have a tremendous staff at the rec center, both full-time employees and part-timers. They do care. I've articulated this on so many occasions. The rec center is a valuable public resource. It's a great asset in this community, and it must be preserved. And it also can be made better, which is one of the reasons why we convened a rec center sustainability task force. I'd love to talk to you about that sometime.
I want to say one thing.
Real quick.
Real quick. The rec center is adding to the quality
Definitely.
of life for many people in this community.
Definitely.
And I'd recommend all of you go over there and check it out.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. We appreciate that. Any additional citizen comments, please?
Mary Hess. Well, I listened to the WWP project plan, and as a senior citizen on a fixed income, those millions are starting to add up. The good news is I understand we don't get any septic tank sludge anymore at the disposal plant, which is great. The plant was never built for that kind of heavy effluent anyway. But I was wondering, since now present residents and taxpayers of Saline and future residents will be paying this proposed increase, I was wondering if we have increased the tap-in charges of water and sewer for the present and future tap-in charges, because they definitely are going to benefit, as I will. And I think they definitely should start taking a bite of the bullet cost too. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, tap-in fees have been increased and will continue to be increased as deemed appropriate by staff and city council. Additional citizen comments, please.
Hello, council. My name's Rob Zimmer. I reside at 9359 Barron Way, Saline, Michigan. I had the pleasure of speaking before the Planning Commission previously, a couple weeks ago, in regards to the adult use cannabis ordinance. I currently work in the industry. Skymint Brands, Skymint Brands is the name of the cannabis company I work for. We're based here in Ann Arbor. We have 17 locations across the state. Councilmember Camaro Sulak, you had some questions about tax revenue. I can answer that for you.
Perfect.
So currently under the state's tax revenue system, 3% of the sales tax for medical marijuana is captured at the state level. 25% of that 3% is distributed to municipalities by proportion by number of stores. So in the fiscal year 20, that payout per med store was $800. For fiscal year 20 for recreational, the payout was $28,000 per store. Projections are for fiscal year 21, $50,000 per store per municipality that opts into adult use. The 10% sales tax is captured at the adult use versus 3% for med. In adult use, 15% of that 10% is what's distributed to municipalities. So a lot of numbers, but bottom line is the state takes a larger portion of the sales tax. You guys get a smaller portion compared to med, but the numbers are vastly going in the direction of increased tax revenue. Again, $28,000 for fiscal year 20 and $50,000 per store for fiscal year 21. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to Skymint applying for a recreational license here in Saline. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer. Appreciate your attendance and advocacy. Say hello to your folks for us. Yeah. Any additional citizen comments this evening? Again, I defer to the city clerk. Any comments provided in writing either during or in advance of tonight's meeting in which the individual wanted their comments read? Easy enough. Is there any other business to come before Saline City Council this evening? Then please note our upcoming meetings, including one added for the last Monday in April to discuss the final reports for the Rec Center Sustainability Task Force and the Historic Properties Working Group. If there's nothing further, the chair would be delighted to entertain a motion to adjourn at 9:09 p.m.
So moved.
Moved by Dillon. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Camaro Sulak. All those in favor of adjourning say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.